I'd like to call the Colorado River District Board of Directors meeting to order here on the Wednesday, April 16. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. President. Just would note for the record, we have a quorum of directors again. And next on the item on the agenda is the update on the Colorado Dredge and Fill Program. Rebecca Reesmore, our water resource engineer, will take the lead on this.
Yeah, thanks, President Catlin. Today I'm going to talk about just the update you all in the process for the dredge and fill regulation that is being developed right now at this state level. This was a request from the board at our March 6th legislative session. I'm going to give you all that update and then also take the opportunity to just give you an idea of what's in that draft regulation at this time, what the River District concerns are with that draft regulation, and then briefly touch on some of the developments on the federal level that are going on with the Section 404 dredge and fill program. So I'll go ahead and start this presentation here. Just to give you all a brief background, this is a very brief background. Of course, there's a lot of backstory to this, but where we are now, the board will recall that last year under House Bill 1379, the Water Quality Control Commission is required to set up a dredge and fill state program for permitting by the end of this year. They are required to promulgate those rules, and in accordance with that requirement, the Water Quality Control Division under CDPHE drafted a regulation called Regulation 87 and released that to the public in December of last year. Stakeholders had the opportunity to provide comments on that draft regulation, and those comments were provided to the division in January. And then using those comments, the division set up a stakeholder process for the next year, essentially, until that rulemaking hearing goes into effect later this year. To give you an idea of what's in that draft regulation, it's about 30 pages. It has 11 sections. And a lot of this is from House Bill 1379. A lot of it is for verbatim text that the division has to use or that can't change in this draft regulation. And one of the things the River District was really interested in looking at when we reviewed this is to make sure that this regulation doesn't exceed the authority that was given to the division in the bill. And so just to give you an idea of what's in this, section 87.1 is general provision, which goes over the scope or the authorization and purpose of this regulation. 87.2 is definitions, and this is pretty self-explanatory. Most of these definitions were taken from verbatim from the bill, but they did add a few, I think about 6 definitions that the division added in their own language, and there are probably going to be more. 87.3 is scope and applicability, and this includes the exempted activities and the excluded types of waters section. 87.4 is guidelines for provisions and essentially lays out the guidelines carried over mainly from the Section 404 federal program. 87.5 is on consultation details on how the division will consult with different agencies, both at the state and federal level, mainly CPW, the Department of Agriculture, Division of Water Resources, and then on the federal level, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and EPA. Section 87.6 is on individual authorizations and is on that process that applicants will go through to get an individual permit for their dredge and fill activities. 87.7 is on general authorizations, which is very similar to that 87.6 section, but this is for permits that have a lower impact it impacts to waters of the state. And so these have a general authorization, which is a kind of a less burdensome permit to get. 87.8 is on pre-construction notification. Some projects are required, of course, to have a pre-construction notification for their permit, while others are not. And so that section goes into those details. And then 87.9 is requirements for authorization. Again, kind of some of those details for what's required in authorizations. For example, You need to not have these certain impacts in your construction project. That personnel from the division can visit the project at all times, those requirements. 87.10 is on compensatory mitigation. And compensatory mitigation is required for all projects that have impacts above a certain threshold, and that threshold is 0.1 acre for wetlands, and then 300ths of an. So if a project has impacts above those thresholds, compensatory mitigation is required. And then 87.11, modification and termination, just kind of how that process is terminated, and if there's any issues with the permit. So to give the board an idea of what these stakeholder sessions have looked like, I mentioned that the Water Quality Control Division used comments to set up the schedule for these stakeholder sessions. And the way that they did that is essentially breaking up the draft regulation into sections that to be reviewed at the stakeholder sessions. So instead of us all looking at the entire draft regulation and trying to provide comments, they're really trying to focus those comments on one or two sections at a time. They have about one stakeholder session a month, and have laid out which sections will be discussed at each of those stakeholder meetings. And I think the important thing to note here is that you can see those blue arrows are the ones that have already happened, and the orange and yellow ones are ones that have not happened yet. And so at this point, there's still a lot of the draft regulation that we haven't even had the opportunity to really go into detail on concerns or discussions on the impacts of this. And so there's still a lot more of this process to go. I will note that the yellow arrows are two stakeholder sessions that were added by the division for the compensatory mitigation and the individual authorization sections, as they realized that we probably have a lot more discussion on these two topics and would need more time. And then largely, thanks to Sonia, that June 3rd session is actually going to be in person here on the West Slope in Grand Junction. So thanks to Director Chavez for really kind of pushing the division to maintain some contact with the West Slope, and we're going to have that over here. Or the division will have that here. And then that July session is really to finalize stakeholder feedback as to the highest extent that the division can. The division will continue to revise their proposal after this stakeholder session, and stakeholder sessions will continue. However, that formal rulemaking process will begin in August. And then the hearing is scheduled to take place in December. So the River District, we have been involved in this process. We've attended the stakeholder sessions and have provided comments when we have felt that is necessary. At this point, we do have kind of three main concerns that I want to highlight for the board. And as I mentioned, some of these concerns we haven't even really had the opportunity to address in these stakeholder sessions because that section hasn't come up yet for discussion. But the first one I want to talk about is individual authorization and the duration that the division is including for those permits, the exempted activities for irrigation and drainage ditches, and then talk about the recapture provision and how that applies. So the first one is for individual authorizations. And in section 87.6, it goes into the details of how an applicant would apply for an individual authorization and how that would apply. And what we're concerned about here is really that yellow highlighted section, which says that authorized project representatives shall apply for renewal of the individual authorization every 5 years should the activity of the whole continue beyond the term of the initial authorization. Now, under the federal guidelines for section 404, an individual permit is authorized for 5 years. And if construction extends beyond 5 years, an applicant needs to get a renewal, which is understandable. However, what concerns us is that piece that says activity as a whole. Well, what does activity of a whole mean? So in the definitions, activity as a whole is defined as discharge of dredged material into state waters that triggers a need for an individual authorization in the first instance, as well as the project's short and long-term operation. Right, so it's just confusing. What does that mean? Well, in the notes that the Water Quality Control Division provided, they said that long-term operation is the lifespan of a project. For example, a water supply project, it would be the lifespan. Well, as we know, a water supply project may have a 30 or 50 or 100-year lifespan, and so requiring a dredge and fill authorization for the long-term operation of the project is really inappropriate because that dredge and fill activity is complete after the short-term operation is complete after the construction part of the project. We don't at this point know if the division's intent is to really put this into place. I think there's a lot of impacts where, you know, you can imagine a road, for example, would be a long-term operation of a project. A road could go through an area of state waters and potentially require an authorization renewal every 5 years. That's probably not something that is administratively possible for the division. So we're not sure that this is their intent at this point. But we feel that the long-term operation requirement is really inappropriate for a dredge and fill permit. And it's something that a lot of stakeholders, not just us, have flagged as a concern. And it will be brought up at the June stakeholder meeting, and I imagine we'll have a very robust conversation. The second concern that I want to get into is the exempted activities for irrigation and drainage ditches. It's important to note that under the state program, irrigation and drainage ditches are state waters. They are not excluded types of water, so they do fall under the state's jurisdiction. And they fell under the Army Corps' federal jurisdiction many times prior to Sackett as well. However, there are a lot of exemptions for activities that would be happening in an irrigation and drainage ditch. And the first thing I just want to talk about is maintenance. So maintenance is repairs to an existing structure or feature to keep it in its existing state of proper condition to preserve it from failure or decline. This includes, replacing piping in a ditch or doing bank stabilization in a ditch, repairing those side slopes. Those are all considered maintenance activities. And those are completely exempt under this state program. For all ditches, it doesn't matter what the ditch is used for, those projects are exempt. Where it gets more confusing is when we're looking at construction of a ditch. And so construction in the state regulation is defined as new work and work that results in an extension or expansion of an existing structure. And this could include ditch relocation, putting in new control structures, converting a ditch to a pipe or lining. In this case, construction is only exempt if it is an agricultural ditch. And if it is a municipal or industrial ditch, those exemptions do not apply. As we all know, because we live and work in Colorado, that's kind of messy because not all ditches are for only one use or the other. There are a lot of ditches that have both uses. And so stakeholders have pressed the division to clarify how that would be applied. You know, would a ditch with more than 50% of its shareholders as municipal rights, would that automatically not be exempt? What if it's 50.1%? How does that divvy out in terms of those exemptions? And the way that the division has said they'll apply this is that if a construction project is going into effect and that construction project is mainly for a municipal or industrial purpose, then it would not be exempt. But if it was for an agricultural purpose, it is exempt. That's still pretty ambiguous. Of course, as we know, if you have a mutual ditch, for example, with many shareholders, there may be a construction project that benefits all shareholders. And so then determining what that construction is for is very difficult. So this is something that we would like a lot more clarity on. The division has said they are going to be looking at this on a case-by-case basis. But I think, you know, as we all know with regulation, it's better to not have those case-by-case basis examples and to really have some clarity on how this applies for the project applicant. So
Rebecca,
Yeah.
hold up just a moment here.
oh,
Thank you,
please.
Director Kellen. I agree, this really needs to be defined, and there's gonna be multiple cases where this happens, but my question about this is, this only applies to the Sackett waters, right? Those waters that aren't considered waters of the US, they're disconnected hydrologically from the main body of water, or does the state gonna require the same permitting as the Army Corps does? So if I'm gonna go build a gate for a municipality, it would require a permit, but if I'm doing it off the Colorado River, I need a 404 permit.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think that's something that we have clarity on at this time. They have said that there may be instances where there's dual jurisdiction and people require.
Yeah, that's my bigger concern if they're going to get joint permit application process. Or will the jurisdiction of the Army Corps remain the same, which in that case, most of these projects would be, we're gonna be diverting water from the stream that has water in it, which would be waters of the US, would be federal jurisdiction. And the Sackett waters, I would doubt there'd be many instances where there would be a diversion off of a stream that only runs water on a handful of occasions, but it could be wrong, but I think it's worth following through.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think something that we would like more clarity on. Jason, did you want to add?
Yeah, if I could. I think there will be instances where we have sort of two jurisdictions, depending on where you're at, but there is still a Federal Clean Water Act.
Right,
Yeah, and you may very well be under the Corps' jurisdiction in which you will follow the Corps' regulations. And, in this instance here, this has always been the case with the Corps regulations.
Yeah.
So what they've done is they've taken this and they've transferred it over to the state regs. If you had a primary municipal purpose for that ditch, and this has always been a point of conflict, depending on what sort of guidance you've gotten from both the Corps and the EPA on this issue is when is it municipal and when is it and we're facing the same instance right here. I think from our perspective, we would like to get it cleared up in the state's jurisdiction in terms of this, but you're still gonna have that quandary until we get further guidance under the post-Sackett decision.
and I feel like it would benefit the state of Colorado to clarify where there will be dual jurisdictions. And where that's going to apply and make that exceedingly clear so that applicants aren't confused.
And one of the things that Rebecca, who's, by the way, has done an awesome job in tracking all this, and I appreciate all of it. One of the big issues, I think, with clarifying this municipal and agricultural divide is the fact that it's pretty clear in the statute that the municipal use is not exempted. So we're gonna have to work hard with CDPHE to kind of find that fine line where they don't feel like they're getting outside the confines of the statute to determine where that divide is. But we recognize it as an issue for sure.
And Scott, did you have a question?
No, I got it answered. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Well, go ahead, Sonia.
And I think just even, Jason, getting some help on the clarification on what the recourse is when you have I think the idea of having to go through a rulemaking process or getting in front of the commission and waiting for that time to go and make your argument could be arduous and long and would lead to delay and stuff. So I think some sort of expedited process could be helpful.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, we still have a Federal Clean Water Act, and many of the systems that our constituents are going to be dealing with are going to be under the Corps' jurisdiction.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
So if I could, Rebecca, so who was directed and who came up with the draft languages that's in there now? Staff come up with them? Or is it directed by the Water Quality Control Division? And I'm specifically concerned about the creep that has risen from moving it from a permit system to a license system. And then 5-year renewal. And who, yeah, exactly. And once they get your clause in, this is where you never get out. And so I think we really ought to fight hard on that. That is absolute. I can understand responsibility and posting bonds to make sure the project is done. But the life of the project, really, that is just, that's insane. So anyhow, just a broader.
Well, I think you're hitting on a subject that Rebecca has yet to cover, but she will cover it and then we can have that discussion.
Okay.
So I hear you.
It's burning me.
I can tell. But I think she's getting there, so, she.
Well, no, thank you, Director Munger. And to answer your question on who drafted it, it was staff from the Water Quality Control Division. They're housed under the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So it was state employees drafting that language. That is a major concern for us as well, that lifetime of the project. We don't really understand why that would be applicable based on the fact that the dredge and fill activity is complete when construction is complete. It's different from, say, a 401 or 402 permit where that is, continuing for the life cycle of the project. So that is definitely a concern for us and many other stakeholders as well. As you can imagine, there are a lot of different projects that would impact across the state, and stakeholders have brought that up.
Yep, thank you.
So it'll come up in, probably with some fireworks at the June stakeholder meeting, I imagine.
Yeah, and I guess, is there any chance on what you have up on the board of when you convert a ditch to a pipe, because usually it's because you have seepage and you can't hold it, that doesn't seem like construction to me, it seems like maintenance. And is there any chance of getting a little bit more liberal definition of maintenance?
Director Ingram, you give me a great segue to the next slide. So to get into that a little bit more, yes, maintenance would be exempt. So if you were replacing a pipe that was already in place, that would be exempt under this state program. However, we do have some concerns regarding implementing a new piping or lining project based on what's called the recapture provision. And this recapture provision is something that is in the section 404 federal regulation, but it has been carried over into this state regulation. And directly from this regulation, it says that any discharge of dredge materials into state waters incidental to any activity that brings an area of the state waters into a use to which it was not previously subject, or the flow or circulation of state waters may be repaired, or where the reach of state waters may be reduced, it is not included in the exempted activities. What does that very strange language mean? That essentially means that there is an exemption to the exemptions. So if you have a project that would typically be exempt, but it falls under the criteria provided in this recapture provision, it is no longer exempt under the exemption. Well, those are the criteria highlighted that if you have impair the flow or the circulation of state waters, or where you reduce the reach of state waters. And that's an area where we see lining and piping projects potentially falling under, because let's say you have an earthen ditch, and you have a wetland that's fed by that earthen ditch from, of course, seepage, as we all have with those structures. And then you line or pipe that ditch and that wetland goes away because you are not feeding it from the seepage of that ditch. You are now impairing state waters. So that is a concern for us. We think that should still be maintained under the exemptions. Under the federal guidelines, this has been treated with a regional general permit. So it's been a general authorization and not an individual authorization, which does expedite that process a little bit. The division has said that they kind of see these two different pieces of this criteria, that one, you're converting waters to a new use, or that the activity impairs the flow, circulation, and reach of the waters. And they've done a little bit of research into this and found out that under federal guidelines, the EPA has said only one of these criteria need to be satisfied for the recapture vision to apply and for the activity to no longer be exempt. But under Army Corps, they say both of these need to apply for this to apply and not be exempt. And the division is going to take kind of the more liberal, I guess, less regulation version of that. And they're going to go with the Army Corps of Engineers interpretation and say that both of those pieces have to apply. So the division is saying for the recapture provision to apply and for you to not be exempt anymore, you have to be converting an area of non-WOTUS state waters into a new use. And you have to impair the flow, the circulation of waters. And they have said that they do not consider a ditch and lining project to change the waters to a new use. It's important to note that use in this context is not beneficial use, such as in state water rights law. This is kind of an ecological, definition of use. You're not changing the use of the waters in an ecological sense. And so they have said that the recapture provision in their mind does not imply to ditch and lining projects. We would like some more clarity on that, as you can imagine, and we would like perhaps some language to clarify what that use may mean so that we can be more insured on this. And the division at this point is writing some additional language that we will review when they have that complete to see if our concern is satisfied.
Right, go ahead.
Did you have a question first?
No, I'll wait.
Is this going to affect going from a flood irrigation to a sprinkler system, for instance, on agricultural property?
That's a good question. You have any input?
It really shouldn't.
It shouldn't, yeah. It's a delivery mechanism. But I mean, I'm assuming that you're still gonna be pulling off the ditch. If you're not pulling off the ditch, we're talking about a piping project,
Right.
so, yeah.
And it's about placement of fill in a specific type of wet or waters of the state. So most conditions, placing fill in those waters that would create the pressurized system. Doubt it.
But there definitely where flood irrigation overflows, it does create ecosystems and things that might be considered threatened by going to sprinkler.
Sometimes.
Well, and if you're someplace like the Upper Gunnison where you're taking your diversion to the river and you have a flood irrigated system, how are you gonna separate what could be impacts to a riparian area to just natural water returning back to the system from flood irrigation? And so, Rebecca, you've done an excellent job describing what I've been trying to get my mind around. And even if they could put that two-part test right in that section of the thing, I think it would make it a lot clearer. And I think for folks, it's a good thing that they're taking this approach and trying to create a two-part test instead of making it so stringent. So just so folks are clear, that's a good thing. They just need to clear because it is unfair.
I have a question. It seems, is this where compensatory storage comes in? If I dry up a wetland, measure the space and replace it somewhere else in that drainage, haven't we taken care of that? Or do I have to leave that wetland after I run a pipe through it?
I think the first aspect of that is that you're going to be able to, if this all comes to fruition here, you're going to be able to lay that pipe without any compensatory storage or mitigation.
Really?
And so, it was interesting, when Rebecca and I were talking to the division on this. They were shocked that we kind of had this interpretation of that language. So it clearly wasn't something that they were thinking about or wanting to enforce. And so I'm hoping that the clarifying language that they come up with works for all of us. They were like, no, we don't see it that way. Because I raised that very issue of the drying up of, and they were like, oh, we wouldn't, we don't view the recapture provision in that way, so.
That's not the way Rapinos is laid out and as it's imposed in North Dakota. And what Colorado's doing is they're mirroring the Rapinos piece as it was identified under Obama. And if you have a wetland in North Dakota, Iowa, wherever it may be, you can't go in and pipe it. Get it out of there. You can't do it. And then before you can do that, there's also a provision in there to where there can be at the request of whatever regulator that they can do a biological assessment of the site. And if there's found to be a leopard frog in there, well, good luck.
Is that only natural wetlands or can it be irrigation created wetlands?
No, it can be both.
That's separate.
Now, that's in a different state, but
Yeah,
that's still under the Rapinos
Yeah.
rules that this is supposed to be mirroring. And this is far exceeding Rapinos. And that's what the legislation said. And this is overarching of that.
So, well, yeah, so the leopard frog would be under Endangered Species Act,
Right.
so that is,
But that leopard frog's habitat is connected to that man-made wetland.
right, so in this
So-
case, I think the way that the division is interpreting it is, it's a little separate from Rapinos.
Okay.
Potentially, but in the way that they're being, they're not considering the pipe going through the wetland to be an activity that they would need to require an individual authorization. So they're potentially being a little bit less regulatory, focused in that way.
Okay, thank you for
Yeah.
correcting me.
It gets very, if you give yourself a headache, go read some of this federal language. It's really complex. But hopefully that clarifies that. I think there is, we're seeing this as a positive thing in the way that they're interpreting it. We just want some more clarifying language.
But write it down.
We'll still have, you still have the issue of EPA and the Army Corps having different interpretations of the recapture provision for WOTUS, which is gonna be 95% of the waters that, most of our constituents are dealing with.
And we're still getting guidance, and you're gonna cover this, but from the federal government on how they are interpreting post-Sackett, so.
Yeah, and this is just kind of the last note on this, as Jason mentioned, of course, section 404 is still in place and is gonna be applicable on many projects that are happening throughout the state. There's not maybe major changes at this point in the new administration, since they haven't been in place for very long, but they did put out in the Federal Register in March, what they're calling the WOTUS notice. The formal title is the WOTUS notice, the final response to SCOTUS. Great, I love
Humor,
it.
You've been waiting all week.
Practice.
And this notice is essentially to tell stakeholders that before they make a lot of administrative changes, they're really looking for some feedback from stakeholders and kind of on these three different areas. They're looking for some feedback on what the scope of relatively permanent waters means, and what features that phrase applies, on the scope of continuous surface connection and to which features that applies, and then the scope of jurisdictional ditches. So they are holding some stakeholder sessions at the federal level with different entities. Those haven't been set dates yet, but sometime in April or May, they've said. And so we will be listening into that at least to see what's being discussed. And they are taking written comment as well. And then the only other thing to mention is that in addition to this WOTUS notice, a guidance memorandum was released in March, and this was to provide some additional clarification on what continuous surface connection means. The board will recall that in Sackett, it was, that continuous surface connection is required for a wetland to be jurisdictional under the federal guidance. And so this guidance memorandum is seeking to clarify that a little bit more and essentially setting up a two-part test to say that if a wetland is going to be jurisdictional, one, it has to be adjacent to waters of the US, which generally means a traditionally navigable water or a relatively permanent body of water. And then it has to be connected to that adjacent body of water via a continuous surface connection where it's difficult to tell where the waters of the US ends and the wetland begins. And previously, under kind of the post-Sackett guidance, it was interpreted that continuous surface connection may be through a non-jurisdictional discrete feature, such as a non-jurisdictional ditch. And this guidance is saying, no, that connection has to be through a waters of the US or has to be through something that's jurisdictional. It can't be connected through something that is also not jurisdictional. So a little bit more guidance on that. I think this is obviously probably going to change. There could still be a lot of movement on some of these definitions and how this is implemented, but I just wanted you all to know that this is being discussed at the federal level as well. And that's my last slide, so I'm happy to take any more questions or comments that the board has.
Holden, go ahead.
I don't like this thing at all. You're never gonna get me to say I like this, because this is terrible land use control in Colorado. Army Corps just drag you through the mud, and that's exactly what this is gonna go, with no real end in sight, and just the state with their fist around you. Now that I got my personal opinion out of the way on this. With this continuous service connection, is there any talk within the state about navigable waters and the definition of navigable waters and how that is come about? Is there, because I haven't seen that yet anywhere.
That's a great question, Director Van den Brink. Right now, the state is referring to the federal definition of waters of the US, and so they have not wanted to define that on their own. They're referring to the federal.
Correct. Now, the nexus between what's navigable waterways also ties into commerce. And all Supreme Court's 16 Supreme Court justices over about a 20 or 15-year period, however that is, over many years, have all came to the same conclusion that that is based upon commerce. We do not have commerce in western Colorado based upon a river. That's the Missouri River, Mississippi River, Columbia River, things like that. So how are they getting that connection if they're not addressing it, but they are following the federal rule with WOTUS that talks about navigable being there for commerce? How can this even be a possible rule then? And I have yet to get a response to that question. So I'm not looking for one,
Yeah.
but I think that's a great question to
I
ask.
do not have a good response to that question, Director Van den Brink, but thank you for that comment.
So
Would you be willing to share these slides out after the meeting? Thank you.
So how do we, as the board, provide direction to our negotiator or our staff and the rest? I'm with Alden. This is just, I was against this thing to start from, and then now it bracket creep by staff and the rest. Somehow this needs to be clipped. Wings need to be clipped here a little bit. Other than that, we'll go back to our legislators and voice our concern to Speaker McCluskey and Senator Roberts and the rest, and said, this is unacceptable. What you have provided as rules, as direction for rules, was thrown in the trash can, and they have done their own thing with their own ideals and taken what we were concerned about and made it into reality, our concerns. So I just want to make sure you have our full and unforgiving blessing to be against all. The creep on this thing is just incredible. And again, I said it before, I'll never be affected by this. But this is affecting commerce, and it isn't about affecting water quality and the rest. It's control. And we see this every day in different issues. It's not an issue, it's control. So anyhow, I just want to make sure that, you can. Director Munger said this is garbage.
Jason, did you have something?
Yeah, I think what would be helpful for Rebecca and myself is to get some real world examples about the impacts. Because the reality is, the River District has gotten 404 permits before. They've had conditions on them. We followed the conditions. We haven't applied for a 404 permit in a very long time. So
What do you want?
I just some real world scenarios where you are seeing this impacting your processes, so that we can go back to the division and be like, here's an instance where this could affect us.
Set up a time, let's talk.
Okay, happy to.
Yeah, Alden, we talked about just going back to some of our past projects. Where you think there could be a waters of the US and then a state waters kind of issue. Pulling those examples out, discussing the project, the 404 permit that you got, and saying, okay, how would state waters apply in this situation? And walking through those examples and getting responses back from the division to say, well, we would do X, Y, or Z here, or we don't see an issue or whatever, so that we can just, because they're not familiar with the different permits. They don't know regional permit 5 from 37 very well because they've never had to apply it. And so that was what we thought would be really helpful for them, for Jason and Rebecca, is just to walk through that and because I think they don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
And so unless we could bring and highlight those things for them, we won't get additional clarity. So I think if they can, we can have staff directed to kind of facilitate that process, or a small gathering of maybe conservancy districts or people who've done projects in Compagre, we can kind of compare. Walk through.
Jerry?
Thank you, Director Callan. I do think it's really important to walk through scenarios in this situation to see what we're talking about in terms of the definition between the separation between WOTUS and the Sackett waters. Where will this apply? Where might there be joint jurisdiction? And what the applicants should expect. There's a wetland not very far from here that I did a delineation on many years ago. That water came off a mountainside, created a wetland on a bank, turned into a small stream, and then disappeared into a gravel bar, and then was connected back to the river. Guy wanted to build a house on it. That's now not covered by WOTUS. That would be covered by Sackett. And those types of situations, who has jurisdiction over that? And when does the project terminate? It should be when fill is done being placed, not when the project is not yet complete. And one other thing I wanted to bring up is, I'm working through a joint permit application. Another state of Oregon has got a similar process where they do a joint permit with the Army Corps. And the renewal is via email. You just say, are you done with this project? And if you are, you just say yes, and you're done. That's it. If you are not yet done placing the fill in the wetland, you say no, then they just renew the permit. It's a pretty straightforward process. The other thing I wanted to point out is when this bill was being written, one of my county commissioners suggested that this be run through CWCB because of their knowledge of the waters of the state, and they have this huge database, and they have an understanding of what waters are ephemeral and what waters aren't. And that would be useful information to bring into these discussions about where the Sackett water processes are going to apply and where they don't. And I still think that that's a good idea. I kind of do wish that they had been brought into this somehow, because I feel like this is going to be a heavy load for CDPHE to reinvent the wheel. So if there's any way to walk through scenarios that look at these potentially disconnected wetlands, and think through how applications will be made and how that's going to affect the applicant would be a good step.
I have a question. Is there any place in this rulemaking that we can suggest how long a permit should take? I'm concerned about the backlog. That's right.
Director Catlin, that's a really good comment. At this point, that's still kind of under discussion. They have said that it could be up to 2 years for some, but I think stakeholders are looking for a much shorter timeline,
Yeah.
especially for general authorizations and for some of those that are non-huge impact projects. But that is definitely still to be determined. And they've also laid out some timelines within that individual authorizations and general authorization section as to, you know, when they get the permit materials, how long before that notice of intent has to be issued, or the public notice has to be issued. And so that's something that we have also commented on, is that there needs to be timelines for each of these different steps that are outlined. So we will definitely take that into consideration as well to provide additional comments on that.
Well, you know, one of the reasons that I bring that up is that there will be irrigation companies that want to upgrade their delivery system via pipe and or lining. And given what you said about 2 years, you know, you need to remind them that the price of pipe changes every day. Cost of labor goes up every day. We should not be postponing conservation of water and of improving the environment because we can't get a permit for 2 years. I mean, in reality, that is, that's like fantasy land. If you don't want anything to happen, tell them it takes 2 years to get a permit. So maybe you could impress upon them that, you know, you need to take a look, what does construction take, how long does it, you know, how long are quotes good, some of those kind of things, because otherwise, they won't have a backlog. A lot of folks say, hell with it, I can't wait 2 years. So, Jerry?
I think that's the reason to have, that exemption process ironed out
Yeah.
very smoothly so that it's a phone call.
I get it.
And that's been the case with the Army Corps of Engineers.
They've been doing it a long time.
Yeah, I
These
mean,
folks are brand new.
I've made the phone call, hey, this is this. And
Right.
they just say, go for it. It's an ag project, so.
Did you have something else?
Yeah, and this will be my, and I'll be quiet after this, Mr. Chair. One, that Director Dennison, what you mentioned is the CDPHE is acting as the EPA. And what you talk about, CWCB will be weighing in at cooperating agency. So they will be part of that process, but that's how the feds have it. EPA is in charge, but Army Corps does their work because of their area of expertise. The other thing is our state's trying to go through a water plan as well. And this is to every water user in this room, a water person. What is this project? What is this policy gonna have upon us creating a firm water supply for our water users in our state as a state that's growing, going through climate change? And now you wanna throw in a ruling like this that has no sunset date on how long it's gonna take for you to get your permit or the sideboards that are on it. And I've seen other states that have had, that they have a mission too, to get firm supply, but they've all overregulated themselves to where now they can't do nothing. So they're stuck. And that's exactly where this is going. And that's the intentions of some people that are pushing this legislation through and pushing this policy, is to control that narrative so that you have to live within the confines of the natural curtailment rather than even having a little bit of a savings account sitting there or for other projects to make your operation better. That's their whole premise. And I think Colorado's really got to question themselves, and the legislator does. What's your priority? What do you want to get done here? You got a population at risk, but you're more worried about the environment? Come on, the two can work together. We've proven it can happen. But now you want to throw an arduous and regulation upon us for what benefit, what real value? Because there's already regulations out there that continue to be in place that they negate to look at that prevents pollutive discharges into open waterways.
But doesn't protect the waters that were removed by Sackett. So that's what the state's trying to do, is protect the waters that were removed by the Sackett decision. So basically, we're trying to, their intent is to go back to the pre-Sackett protections.
Yep. But it's gonna tie our hands to get anything else done to advance our state.
Sonia?
I think, Rebecca and Jason, on the compensatory mitigation piece as well, I'm curious as to whether they're gonna move forward with a sort of 1-to-1 replacement, or they're gonna try to get that ecological uplift and say it's, you know, 1 to 1.5, or you have to have some sort of improvement, and you go for maybe something that's seepage fed to something where it's open water habitat, you increase your consumptive use, that we just take a strong position on that as well, because I think there are some basins that are over appropriated where that would not be a good direction to head.
Francie?
So Jason, you mentioned that we still have the Clean Water Act. Well, do we?
Well, we do for a number of waters, yes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, and again, you know, as Director Dennison pointed out, what the state has laid out here is their attempt to pull in those waters that would have been covered by the Federal Clean Water Act that are no longer covered. Now, to the extent they're reaching beyond that, we have some concerns because that was not the intent of the legislation, as I understand it, and the number of conversations I had. So we're talking about waters that would have been regulated pre-Sackett
Mhm.
that will now be regulated by the state, some of those waters, and the rest will be covered under the Clean Water Act. There are, you know, the state could apply for full assumption of the entire 404 permitting process.
Yeah.
It's happened in 3 states in the US that I'm aware of. I think it's Florida, New Jersey, and Michigan, maybe recently. They're not trying to do that. This is a subset of waters that was covered under WOTUS tradition.
But the Clean Water Act is still under attack.
Sure,
And
yeah, and
so with this This wouldn't supersede all of what the Clean Water Act does though, right?
No,
Just specifically for Creosacket. So is there going to have to be more if we lose the Clean Water Act?
so this has been, since I've been at the River District almost 17 years now, and this has been an issue between changes in, not necessarily regulations, but there have been a number of decisions in that time before the Supreme Court. There have been a number of changes in the guidance. It's a hot button issue. And it's one of the things I hate talking about with this board, to be honest with y'all, because it is a hot button issue. We've got people on both sides of this within our constituency. We're trying to reach a balance here. We worked incredibly hard on this legislation. We're continuing to work incredibly hard on this rulemaking to make it balanced. We're not going to change the Supreme Court decision. We're not going to, at this point, change the legislation that's been passed in the state of Colorado. So what we're trying to do is clarify what we have.
Peter?
Sorry.
Director Chandler.
Oh,
Oh, I was just gonna, just to follow up, I mean,
It's
isn't
not
one way to
on the
look at this as Colorado trying to be in charge of its own destiny and have a little protection from those ups and downs of what happens from administration to administration. I know with WOTUS especially, it was this rule and then this one and this one. And if this rulemaking that you guys are doing such a good job weighing in on, if Colorado can come to a really good system within the state, then that should provide a lot more clarity and knowledge for all of us than just being subject to whims of current administration. So I do think there's some potential upside to this.
Peter?
I was just gonna reiterate sort of what Jason said about staff's approach, council's approach on this has been, generally to balance those competing interests within the River District in a way where the waters that were covered before the Sackett decision are now going to be covered by the state. And we want that to happen in a way that is no more onerous on water users or people that are working in waters than it was previously. Ideally more streamlined, but equally protective, the system could be improved for sure, while still protecting the resource. And so that's been our overall approach. We're not writing the regs or anything, so we only have so much influence on that. But that was our overall approach to it. What we don't want to end up with is the situation where, somebody goes in because they're covered, they're looking for have to go for a state permit, and they end up I'd rather have been covered under WOTUS, right? Because that was less onerous on my project than the state was. That brings up the WOTUS, SCOTUS thing that Rebecca mentioned, because we can assume, I think probably fairly, that the guidance that will come out of that notice will be a reduction in what is covered under, try to reduce the scope of covered WOTUS. And then that leaves the question as to, does the existing state statute and the existing state regs immediately envelop and cover any additional, what is now state waters, or under these interpretive regulations? And so you're not going back and bouncing back and forth, and to the extent there's a new administration, a federal administration in the future that tries to expand back to some other interpretation while still under the Sackett rules, but broadens that. We don't want to keep going back, bouncing back and forth. This is my point. And so I'm hoping that the regs and the statute, can be interpreted in a way that would allow whatever the whims of the federal guidance are that were covered by the state in a way that is not more onerous than it would have been under the law.
You're right, Gary.
That's a really good point, Peter. Having some certainty about where this is headed and thinking about where we were 8 years ago with, maybe it's more, maybe it's 10, 15 years ago with the WOTUS rule from the Obama administration, where they saw this uncertainty and said, okay, Army Corps, if it has a bed, if it has a bank, if it has a high water line, has a low water line, it's enforceable, it's jurisdictional. And that would have removed the irrigation ditches, which would have been something that I was wishing, that was hoping the state would enforce or adopt that kind of forward thinking, so that the question that Director Callan had gets taken out of the equation. You don't have to think about if you're gonna put a pipe in, which is kind of where we've been for a long time. You're gonna go clean your ditch, you're gonna go do something. You're not thinking about, does this fall into this new jurisdiction? So if there's some way to adopt some clarity about what specific conditions would require the connection, which is this second or the water, the state waters, I guess, jurisdiction would be super helpful and clarify where we are.
So I guess, yeah, I agree with both Peter and Karen, that you asked for examples, and I don't have a specific, but I have past many examples in my mind where, and I'm more concerned not about the bigger conservancy districts who have staff that can get permits, but I'm talking about, well, myself and lots of small farmers who have their own ditch that comes out of a creek and it goes along the hillside. And it's always leaked, it's leaked in and it's hard to hold, it washes out. And the wetland that's created by the leak isn't connected to a body of water by a surface connection. It's just a wetland below the ditch. And I was fairly comfortable, not with the idea, I'm on the ideological side, I wish the state would have left it alone, but they didn't, so that's what we're faced with. But I was fairly comfortable with the legislation, which you guys worked hard on and many others, that exempted ag. It exempted exactly what I'm describing, I felt like, in the legislation. It exempted those. But what I'm seeing is, as the rulemaking is happening, is that they're coming back and saying, no, we probably, it's at best ambiguous and at worst, saying, no, you do need a permit to put this lining or pipe or whatever in your ditch for that wetland, because it's now created wetland. So I guess that's where I'm at.
So I would say that those exemptions that are in the state statute are actually more expansive than they were in the federal legislation. And we,
I would agree.
So my example, would that need a permit?
so
If you're
I'm not gonna advise you on that right now, but
That's your neighbor's property, Tom, not yours, right?
but what I would say is that
My friend.
our concern has been over the recapture provision, which is also a concern under the federal
Yeah.
Clean Water Act. If we can clean up that provision, I think that those concerns are gone. And so that's what we're working.
We need to keep moving. Everybody ready? All right.
Okay, next item. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Jason. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for tolerating us.
Next item, it should be a little simpler than the waters of the United States. We have a proposed resolution to change the location of the third quarterly meeting to Winter Park, Colorado, specifically to the Headwaters Center. There is a resolution that can be found at page 252 of your PDF packet that the staff has proposed. Under your newly amended bylaws, amended as of yesterday by unanimous vote, we would recommend that you pass this resolution setting the July 15th and 16th meeting to take place at the Headwaters Center located at 730 30 Baker Drive in Winter Park, Colorado.
So move. Second.
Motion by John Henry, seconded by Kerry Dennison. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passed.
All right, excellent. Thank you. We will see you in Winter Park in July. Next is the appointment of treasurer. As you will recall during, I believe it was your March 6th telephonic meeting, our treasurer of many years, if not decades, Roger Maggard, resigned due to his skyrocketing insurance. We as staff have kept him on and do intend to keep him on to provide part of our financial control system to make sure that we have the right number of eyes looking at financial transactions. But we would like to ask the board to appoint Ian Phillips, who we appointed as an interim treasurer, as the permanent treasurer. And one amendment to the request in the packet is that we would, our statute requires that we set a bond. So require a bond. Let me say that our primary coverage as a district for any employee financial malfeasance is our insurance policy, which has a $2 million insurance policy limit. The bond historically for our treasurer has been $50,000 for Mr. Maggard, and before that, his partner, who was at the same firm. Staff is recommending that you keep the bond at $50,000. So our request would be that you appoint Ian Phillips, Director of Financial and Administrative Services, as the treasurer of the Colorado River Water Conservation District, and require that a bond be set at $50,000.
My pleasure to make that motion.
Second.
Motion by Alvin Van Brink, second by Lee Hess.
So the question is, so because this is now an employee that would take the treasurer position, if I understand this correctly, we maintain the bond, which is as I understand it, then does that make our primary carrier for the $2 million a secondary carrier instead of the primary carrier? How do those two mix here? Jason, you guys have an opinion on that?
I think our insurance would be the primary. We can specify that
We bind the bond through the same carrier.
through travelers. It's separate than our. We can, I don't know the answer to that, but we can look into that.
So since this is unusual.
Yeah.
I have no objection to it, obviously, but do we need the bond if we've got the $2 million?
We don't actually think we need the bond. The statute that governs the district requires a bond.
We can't, so it's a statutory.
It's a statutory requirement. So we're just asking that you continue the bond on as set. Audrey, the total cost of that bond today annually is.
$175.
Oh, I thought it'd be a lot more than
Yeah.
that. Okay, thank you.
Just before the board votes, but the only thing I would add would be that if for some reason the insurance coverage goes away, that, our insurance says, well, we're no longer covering employees for this type of thing, we would come back to you and propose an increase in the bond.
We have a whole lot else to propose.
I was gonna say
That would be the least of our concerns. So that insurance policy is necessary.
So we have a motion on the table. Second. Will you state what we do?
I think the motion, as I understand it, is that the board is moving to appoint Ian Phillips, Director of Financial Administrative Services, as the treasurer of the Colorado River Water Conservation District, and to set the statutorily required bond at $50,000 for Mr. Phillips.
Alvin?
Ian, do you want to do this?
Of course I do.
Right answer.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Excellent, thank you. Next up is a contract, a request for contract approval. Raquel Flinker, our senior water resources engineer, is going to walk us through that. Raquel, I'll just turn it over.
Sounds good. Thank you, Andy. This is a request that comes forward to the board every 2 years on average. It's a request that the board authorize the general manager to enter in a 2-year contract with BBA for technical support for the West Slope Water Users Interest Group related to the Upper Colorado Wild and Scenic Stakeholder Group. This is $44,000 for 2 years. It's actually, the scope of work is for double that. It's $88,000 for 2 years. And that cost split between the River District and Middle Park Water Conservancy District 50. That's how we have operated for the last several years. But it's contingent on their approval of this contract as well. They're officially on board until the end of this year, but they still need to officially vote for the 2 years. I'm happy to answer any questions on the stakeholder group or.
Just to be clear, so the contingency is that your approval is, and our entering into the contract is contingent on Middle Parks Board agreeing to a new 2-year contract as well. It's a $44,000 financial obligation from us, which would normally fall under the delegated authority, but because it's an $88,000 contract in total, we wanted to make sure the board understood that, and have it move forward with the Middle Park. If for some reason that board does not approve their involvement in the contract, we'll come back to you and talk to you about it.
So, Sonia,
How long has the Wild and Scenic Group been going on, and do you guys see this group continuing in the future and participating in the future in this way, or you're hoping to get the designation done in X number of years?
Peter, you have the history on this.
But
Yeah, I can start, and Peter, feel free to add. So this group was, BBA's involvement in this group and setting this group has been since 2008. It's been a long process. The group, this stakeholder group was developed or formed to develop an alternative management plan to federal wild and scenic designation. So this group, I would say, is expected to continue into the future with this alternative management plan. There are provisions in the stakeholder plan that could make it fall apart to some extent. But this group has been working together. There's an endowment fund that hopefully will be set in the near future, but it requires all the permits to be approved for expansions in the like Moffett system and northern system. I guess I'll leave it there, but Peter, feel free to add.
I mean, it's a little bit of a careful what you ask for because it was developed as an alternative to wild and scenic, what federal designation. It thus requires the active and continual participation. The intent is going to be perpetual. And the idea was you can do more to protect the resource without than the federal government could with simply a wild and scenic designation. And, you know, in theory, it keeps going. The funds that we are seeking appropriation for or a commitment for here are not for the overall the stakeholder group plan itself, but rather for the services of BBA to help the River District and Middle Park, who are part of one of the interest groups in the stakeholder plan, advocate for respective positions that they have.
Scott,
So that kind of like, sounds like the Statue of Liberty. celebration that occurred 20 years ago and still active with the federal government. What are we paying these people for? We get an itemization or it just goes to this subcontractor, BBA or whoever it is? Kind of confused if we're just signing off on a blank check and we've been doing it for 18 years or something, 50 grand a year, whatever we're sending.
It hadn't been that long, but,
Well, when was it? 2008? When was it?
well, the
What
plan
you just
itself has
said?
been in fact, for a while, we haven't been contracting with BBA for that
Oh,
long.
okay, so the semantics on it, but how long have we been writing a check every year for somebody out there to? I don't know what they do. I'm just curious.
No, I mean, but the totally fair inquiry as to what the service is. BBA are technical consultants,
Right,
and they assist the river district and provide technical expertise to the river district and Middle Park and contributions to the overall success of the
so what do
plan.
they do for us? Do they come visit us? Do we
I
get
think just
studies?
second.
I
Let
mean,
me,
what is-
let me,
answer here.
let me try and help answer that, from Eagle County has a big section of this alternative management plan. The very active participants in this group are the Front Range water providers. But having the river district there and the technical consultants protects Eagle County, Grand County, and our interests in keeping that river cool, keeping the water flowing through it. A specific example is a few years ago, the river was so hot, there was a fish kill, needed some cold water released out of Wolford. The Front Range wasn't very excited about doing that, and I think that this presence of this wild and scenic management group was able to facilitate that happening. They look at recreation on the river, on fishing yield, on temperatures, on flow. So it really is a protection of resources that benefits the counties it goes through, so it benefits the river district. And that, I think there has been a pretty good cost share of the money that it takes to protect that resource, but from a local Colorado River County that's affected by this, that's the benefit I see.
I get all the philosophy. I still, maybe someday they could come and present to us.
We could, but that would cost us money, Scott.
Well, I'm sure, I'm sure, but I've got one example here. The Front Range thought the river didn't want to make it, want to add some coal or something, so I'm just.
We have, I mean, Scott, and we can provide a greater detail and update on the program. But there are multiple instances where the Front Range is trying to deprive the flows of the Colorado River and take water out to the detriment not only of the environment, but the economy in our main stem counties. And it's really critical that this, while we didn't want the federal government to engage in the wild and scenic designation, we have to support and provide the technical expertise to help keep that water in the river so that it provides that economy in those.
I don't disagree with the philosophy. I don't. I'm just wondering, we've got a subcontractor writing a check, somebody else is matching our check. And what do they do? I mean, I get they're on standby, I guess, or is this a retainer? Is this a bill? I just want to make sure we're looking at.
Raquel, can you give some examples
Yes,
of what it is they do?
Yeah, and it's in the scope here, but I will say that, every month we get an invoice from BBA detailing what they've done, how many hours they've devoted, to going to meetings. Part of this alternative management plan is data collection and monitoring, and so BBA also does some data collection certain years. And we look over that and approve it or have conversations if something doesn't seem accurate.
One more question, Mr. Chairman, then I'm move on. What was last year's bill?
What was last year's?
Yeah, has it gone up every year? It stays the same amount every year? What happened?
So their hourly fees have gone up, but the amount of hours that they're devoting to this has gone down.
So it's the same.
For the last 2 years, we were doing 40,000, so it has gone up $4,000 for the 2-year contract.
Sonia?
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't want to indicate that I wasn't supportive of something like this. I think there are other examples where the river district's been a facilitator of helping to move projects forward and helping to provide that additional technical expertise, one being the Selenium Management Program, the Lower Gunnison, and helping with that federal process. So I am supportive and just was curious on sort of whether there was a a success or a deadline or something like that in mind when you think you maybe have reached sort of, you've accomplished your goal.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia, Director Chavez. Yeah, this is a unique plan, and it was designed that way. It was designed to require active participation from the stakeholders, for the rest of time until or unless at some point in time it falls apart. If it falls apart, and the plan, disintegrates, the federal agencies at some point in time go back and say, these segments either are or no longer are continually eligible or suitable for wild and scenic designation, and that process, in theory, starts all over again. And that was what the stakeholder group as a whole was intended to try to do, was to protect the resource without that federal overlay. And just with respect to this specific contract, the plan itself is in our reliance on BBA is not of the sort where we write a check to them and hand it off to them and they, come back every once in a while and tell us what they've done. The plan requires active participation by River District staff as well. So sometimes neither I nor Raquel or anybody else from the River District staff can be at a meeting. BBA will be there, but I would say 90% of the time, if not more, River District staff plus BBA are there. Actively involved at the same time. So it's not as, this isn't a situation where we're contracting out the full extent of our involvement in this process. We're actively involved and we're using BBA for their technical expertise to help us walk through the process. The only other thing I would say is just to qualify on the since this is a 2-year contract, the actual amounts if the board is so inclined to consider that the motion would be subject to appropriation because it's a 2-year commitment. Avoiding multiple.
Well, there is inside our memo, there's a scope of work from BBA attached. There's trying to spell out what they do and how they do it. Cost estimates and all these.
We'll make a motion to support this contract.
Motion made by Sonia, seconded by Kathy Chandler Henry.
Just to clarify for the record, the motion was to approve staff recommendation on this contract.
Yes, subject to
Annual.
appropriations.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passed.
Thank you very much. President Catlin, the last item under the general managers is 8H, which was added to the agenda yesterday morning. It's an approval of a transition away from our an employee benefit program called the Retirement Health Savings Account. I provided a detailed memo to the board. Excuse me. Both in person and both in paper on the desk, but also in the email. But Audrey, if you could give a brief summary of the requested action and the financial impact.
Sure, I'll be brief. So this ties in a little bit with the conversation that we had at the budget workshop when we requested approval to transition from Mission Square to Empower for our retirement plan administration. And as part of that transition, we've been reviewing benefits, and one of those benefits is the Retirement Health Savings Plan. So this is a plan that was put into place for all staff in 2008. It operates under some pretty strict guidelines because it has significant tax savings. So contributions go in tax-free, they grow tax-free, they come out tax-free for medical expenses. But they are mandatory contributions. And so we had to put in place some guidelines We have some age-based contributions. And we have changed this program over the years based on staff desire and the board. And so we resurveyed staff again, gave them all the information about what this plan is, how it operates. And the majority of staff are in favor of eliminating contributions, both employee and the employer contribution to this plan. And so what we are recommending doing is effective immediately. So in the April payroll, that we would stop those mandatory employee contributions and reallocate the employer contribution that was going into this plan, which is based off of the employees' contributions to their 457 plan as a matching amount, that we reallocate that into the 401A plan. And so this will have no budgetary impacts to the board, approved budget already. It's just going to go into a different bucket. The other thing is that we would eliminate the contribution for the excess vacation payout, that the board has a policy to pay half of the excess vacation over the allowable limit into this RHS plan. And so instead of it going to the RHS, it would just be a taxable contribution or taxable payout, which the staff could choose to put into some sort of 457 or a health savings account should they choose. That would be their choice. It's a quick overview. It's a complicated benefit. And so it's just, I think, the desire of the staff right now with the restrictions on that plan that they are in favor of eliminating those contributions. So the requested action is that the board approve the elimination of all employee and employer contributions to the retirement health savings plan with a reallocation of existing employer contributions in the form of matching funds for the 457 plan into the 401A money purchase plan and the excess vacation payment as a cash payout through payroll.
Kathy?
So Audrey, you said there's no budgetary impact to the district. Is there any impact to staff as far as their contributions, or will they feel like it's a one-for-one?
So employee contribution, so currently it's either 1% of salary or 2% of salary based on your age. And so that would stop. And so staff would have the ability to put that money into another retirement vehicle, perhaps increase their 457 contribution or an IRA contribution. And so really it gives staff more flexibility as to where they want to allocate their retirement savings instead of it being mandatory.
But I mean, the funding from the district to the employees, does that stay?
Yeah, so that would stay the same. So it's a $2,400 per year bucket of matching funds.
Okay.
And so right now it was allocated into either the 457 or the RHS based on your age. And so now it's just going to be the same for everybody, where that will just go into that.
Great.
Audrey, I would just clarify the motion that you outlined here to include the portion that staff have the option to put their excess vacation payment, not just as a taxable cash payout, but also the option to put it into 457 as you explained. So that's okay with the rest of the board? Just in case you don't want to have that taxable income.
And that's, we can certainly put that in there. It really is an individual staff choice, depending on whether or not they've hit the cap under there's a required cap under the 457. So some employees will have that option. Others who are active savers will not. I would just say, I encourage employees never to hit the vacation cap, so they never have to worry about being capped and then getting paid out at half the value of that. They should take vacation, and that's why they earn vacation, is to take it so that they're well rested when they're actually here working. So it is hopefully not something that happens often. Say that.
You want a motion?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll move to approve what Audrey read.
Staff recommendation. For a second?
Second.
Second, Carrie. Dennison, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passed.
Thank you, Audrey. Directors, updates and concerns. Mr.
Well,
President.
none of us have any concerns, so. No. So the next part of our agenda is where we report on our districts or on our counties. And, what I'd like to try to do is let's focus on water issues rather than other issues. So when we start, the Uncompahgre Valley water users, the Uncompahgre, the Montrose County, the issues are, we're gonna be short. We're gonna start out short. And, you know, that system will work at 50%, but after that, it gets very, very tough. Let's hope we don't go there. The issues are how hot, all of the issues that you're gonna have too, so. Western Slope is not gonna have a real good summer. And, you know, every percentage that we go down in the Uncompahgre just means a couple more hours that day. The next day. Because moving water that quickly and across through some of these crops is, you know, a big deal. So we're looking at a shorter river and a much longer system. So, Kathy.
Eagle County, couple of water issues. It continues to be a kind of push and pull on trying to figure out affordable housing and trying to figure out water supply. We have a good partnership with Eagle River Water and Sand. They've identified a sort of a hole in the river, they're calling it in Edwards, so that it's more water effective to build east of Edwards. It's more land effective to build west of Edwards, but there's that hole in the river there. So that's a challenge. I think the good thing is that the land use authorities and the water providing authority are trying to figure that out together. The only other thing I wanted to mention, we're concerned also like the summer and the heat. I had a video from one of our ranchers at Brush Creek with a herd of 2,000 elk in his. So he's got that added concern, but we are trying to make sure that we're protecting ag land and reclaiming it where we can. So County Open Space is looking at working with the town of Gypsum to reclaim some land that was up for development and for the crop of rooftops, as Director Reynolds says, and to do an ag lease on that like we've done up Brush Creek. So I think that could be a really good thing. There's senior water rights, those would be protected and safe for ag if we can get that project done. That's it for me.
Director Munger.
So it was for the cow business, it was a wonderful winter. So I didn't lose any buildings and I don't look to have 200 acres underwater this spring. In fact, I don't even know if it's gonna flood. But I think as Chair Catlin said, you know, we are gonna be short of water. I think as we move forward with these groundwater monitoring stations and systems, it would be great. I appreciated Don's direction to that yesterday, but it would kind of tie all this investment that we've made in these systems back into some knowledge that we're getting here, because yeah, I think our cricks are ephemeral. Cricks will definitely be ephemeral this year. And so we'll be drying up and we'll be hauling stock water and things, and it'll be dry, but you know, for us, we'd much rather have, short of having, you know, a 500-inch ski season, I'd much rather have some spring rains, and hopefully this one coming up Thursday will help us considerably. We're ready. So thank you.
Thank you. Water, huh? Sideboards. That's all right. I got it written down, so I'm gonna stick to script. I'm finding this works better for me. State of the River was well attended this year, About 50 participants participated. Your River District staff interactions with attendees were very well received, and the topics attracted their attention. People shared after the meeting that they see progress, and that progress was felt through all the presenters that was there, including Kawa was a good one. That brings it back to home to where they can have somebody to help them through some of maybe their individual producers' issues that they're dealing with. So I kind of touched on this a little bit yesterday, or coming up here on something, but the White River Basin was overclassified and will be effect May 1. Those impacted by water shortages are growing. Flows are 15 to 20% less than the historical average. No organized augmentation sources are available. Number of unregistered wells is significant. As I've learned, it's in the hundreds of wells. And a lot of them are being for other uses than just for domestic purposes. So the state's got a lot of learning to do out there and a lot of investigations. So development within the basin will be hampered when this happens. The Division of Water Resources has been conducting considerable outreach throughout the basin and in Moffett County, because there's impacts to western Rio Blanco County or western White River Basin as well, that is in Moffett County. Yampa, or the Yellow Jacket Water Conservancy District, and Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District are progressing solutions to help alleviate the effects of overappropriation. But any solutions are still years from being implemented, so it's gonna take some time. This is what I touched on a little bit yesterday, and recent article that was in the paper or published out there talked about the junior nature of the basin, of the Yampa White Green Basin, and about using them as a sacrificial portion to save Colorado. The thought process greatly impacts Rio Blanco, Moffett, and Routt counties. Ultimately, the state could make this a reality at the expense of these water users and the communities. State employees under the DNR have made comments very clear. This sort of curtailment, that the prior appropriation doctrine could and would be set aside during times of emergency, then imposed rather than a priority, it goes to priorities. So you're looking at domestic water, livestock, power, industrial, non-traditional agriculture, or non-traditional irrigation and recreation as the priority list. That's how they're gonna start checking them off. That's how other states do it.
Well, our constitution sets a priority among water uses, and industrial water is not above agricultural water under our constitution.
Thank you for clearing that then. Okay, I went off of what other states have, so, yeah. But emergency powers, the state engineer does have the ability to make adjustments to that, so. What concerns me is the dialogue we've had with the state. And they keep telling us we cannot plan for compact curtailment. Colorado lawmakers and state agency staff have made it very clear that their primacies lie, that they do not include the majority of the Yampa White Green ways of life as inclusive priorities until it comes to taking sequestration or all utilization of our region's natural resources and tax dollars. This is being seen as an opportunity for state-sponsored land use control, limiting a region's ability to thrive while being forced through an economic transition. We don't have a choice. Our coal and gas is going away. We know that. So I'm gonna skip over a bunch of the next step, but I question for the River District, and I kind of brought this up yesterday again, is what is the volume of compact, post-compact water in the Colorado River District constituents? How much water do they need? How much augmentation water does the River District have in storage? Is the River District a proper entity to have augmentation water for their constituency in storage in the event of compact curtailment? What has the River District done and is it doing to address this? Do we have a plan? Does the Shoshone fit into this somehow? I don't know. That's a good question. Are there adequate reserve supplies for the River District for the water users within the River District boundaries in the event of a compact curtailment? I don't know. Finally, we witnessed a 1/3 reduction in Rio Blanco County of irrigated ag land over the past 5 years. 1/3. Throughout Rio Blanco County, a survey is presently underway to understand the water needs of agricultural users. The basis of this survey will be used to kind of enlighten what additional production could happen if a firm supply was there, present and future water conservation practices, potential for alternative crops, additional opportunities to include new ag land into production. The information will be used to assist with firm water supplies in Rio Blanco County and the White River if we're permitted to develop those supplies. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Mr. Rober? Well, in Delta County, just like everybody else around the table, it's gonna be a short water year. I mean, some of the North Fork, I question whether some of those ditches will be on more than a week or two. the way it looks, but, we've been there before. You know, as far as I think our roundtable is a little concerned about WSRF funding. That's there, but without any state match. I don't know whether we're gonna be able to get projects going forward. And of course, as we've mentioned before, with rising costs of construction and more permits to get and everything else. We're wondering how many efficiency projects will ever get going and go forward. The other thing that kind of came up, I've gotten a couple of calls. I mean, people think there may be some misinformation, and I've tried to tone down the rhetoric until we at least have a meeting April 30th, but with the water measuring devices being required now by the state, there's some question as to why, or not so much why, but how it's going to be interpreted and what are they really looking for other than data? And I kind of said, I think it's data related to probably Big River, but there's been some concern with some constituents about, you know, we've made things work with water trades among individuals and whatnot, and is this gonna shut that off? So we'll see. Hopefully we will more to stay on this. Okay. Other than that, things are rosy.
Don't have a lot of direct wet water comments right now. We talked a little bit yesterday about the Snake River issue, the highway historic user pool, whether or not they're eligible. Look forward to how that trial comes out. For me, getting back involved and hearing, especially the presentation today on the Water Quality Control Division and the dredge and fill permits. I know there's probably issues or concerns about all that in the down the lower blue, but I'll find out more about that as we get into our State of the River discussion coming up in May. So that'll be good. But my main comment is this: I was off this board for about 8 years. And coming back, it's interesting to see how, you know, some things are exactly the same, other things are.
How little we've done.
A little what?
How little we've done.
Things are all right, but here's the thing, you know, we talked about our strategic plan a lot yesterday, obviously. And one of the things we want to be recognized as a leader, and we want to be the go-to agency for information, everything. And when I left 8 years ago, I would say that we were only a little bit a ways along in that, on that spectrum. Having Andy and Amy come over a few weeks ago to make the presentation to Breckenridge on whether or not they might contribute, and they did, to the permanency project was interesting, because I saw a council, a Breck Council, who really, you know, they have a lot of water issues. They got a great water portfolio, but it was always focused locally. They were really well aware of what was going on. Andy and Amy did a great job presenting that day, but you had a lot of nodding heads and a lot of real clear understanding what's going on. And as I talked to people around Summit County about this and let them know I'm back on the board, there's a much higher awareness of what this organization is and all about. So again, not a wet water kind of a comment today, but more of a perception that I wanted to bring up that I see after being on it, off, and now back on, that I think is a real positive thing and a compliment to all you folks over the last year that have been doing something more than, doing a lot of good work.
Thank you. Nancy?
Okay, well, Pickens County, we had a milder spring than the skiers would have liked. But we loved it. Calving was better than we've ever had. It was just incredible weather for calving. Up and down the Crystal was just easy. It was easy. Pickens County continues to focus on the mineralization at Lincoln Creek. And how we're gonna deal with that. I know it's gonna be a statewide issue for long. And we also are working with Eagle County, the Three Meadows Ranch and trying to figure out the water rights up there and how we're gonna manage that amazing piece of property that we conserved along with Eagle County and Aspen Valley Land Trust. It's 4,300 acres and that was a very exciting acquisition and now we're going through the details of that. The county is still working behind the scenes with the Crystal River Wild Scenic stakeholders group. That continues to be a main water focus for the county. And also we're looking at trying to more specifically quantify the flows in the upper Roaring Fork. So we're talking about putting in some new gauges up there to sort of get a handle on what is going on in the upper Roaring Fork, how much water is there in there, what does the salvation ditch do to that, and some things like that.
First of all, I want to start off by saying the State of River was excellent. I appreciate all the staff's hard work. It was well intended. We had some good questions. I really want to acknowledge Lindsay. She's a great public speaker, did a wonderful job of explaining all sorts of confusing details to what I realized was a group of people who weren't generally water people. And I think that that's really important. We talked about our strategic plan yesterday, and what jumped out was the need for education across the board in the water world. And the more that River District continue to help people understand water issues, the better off we're going to be. And we see that have a real effect on the drying up of agriculture, not because of development, not because of system conservation or conservation projects. It's because folks just don't understand water rights writ large, including attorneys, maybe especially attorneys in my area. I have probably talked to 4 or 5 landowners who are relatively new to Uray County that have water rights associated with their property, can't irrigate. They've may have a wastewater decree that overlaps with a primary decree, and they can't get water to their property, not because there isn't a ditch or they just don't know what to do. But more so because they have an attorney calling them every 5 minutes saying, you don't get to use water. I get to tell you when you use water. A landowner who might be a neighbor who doesn't want them using water. So we have all these lands that aren't being irrigated, which is a concern, especially today, because our rivers are 50% higher than they normally are this time of year. It's super hot. My opinion, we should be irrigating early on these years, leaving water in the stream later for temperature concerns. But we're doing the opposite, in part just raw confusion about how water works and people not being ready. But certain powerful landowners that can push other people around. And it's really frustrating. And it gets at the heart of the organization issue that we have in Uray County of not having organized ditch companies that can get their ducks in a row and address their infrastructure problems, which are related to lands being dried up as well. The good news is we've had some momentum on that front. Several ditch companies are starting to get organized, have come to some internal agreements. So we plan on coming to the board with some funding requests. So I'm pretty excited about that. That is good news. But the more we can do to educate the masses about what a water right is and what it's supposed to do and who gets to benefit from that would be really helpful. And I also had the same concerns that Mark have about the measurement rules. I'm also waiting until we have the meeting with Division of Water Resources. Some of those calls you got I may have told them to call you. So, my apologies. But I've been getting those phone calls too from people saying, I read this is confusing. And it does relate to water use in the state of Colorado. A lot of these landowners are looking at that diversion right as we're not measuring the water as is applied to beneficial use, which I think the state should be focusing on, not how much water can I shove through my partial flume. There's a handful of landowners around me that will put all their water through their partial flume and report it to the state and then just dump it back in the river, then also make equal efforts to make sure their neighbors don't get any water. So seriously confusing issue. Like they're focusing on the diversion, but not the consumptive use and the beneficial use that we could be creating out of it for our county. We are having some success from continued efforts working on protecting fens and wetlands around abandoned mines in Uray County, which is a really important issue and related to the dredge and fill rules. These are disconnected wetlands. These are the wetlands that keep our high country clean and abundant wildlife. And we have a lot of work going on there. There's old mining roads. There's things being cleaned up constantly. So there's a ton of work going on in the high country. The Uncompahgre multi-benefit project is moving forward. The Ward ditch is now, the head gate is complete. They are diverting water, so that's exciting. And they're continuing with the restoration work downstream. At the State of the River meeting, we talked about soil moisture monitoring. It came up again with my meeting with our Board of County Commissioners. How do we track these dry years where we have snow above 8,000, 9,000 feet, and we have no snow below it? Not only how do we get that data and how do we enter it into the forecasting models in a way that makes sense? But I think the bigger question is, what do we do with that information? Is it going to affect the operations of Ridgway Reservoir? Is it going to affect the operations of irrigators? Is it going to affect the operations of our downstream users that might place a call on us later in the year? We might have a call come up the river this year. And how we use water is important is because we're not working together to fix these problems. People are trying to rely on these junior wastewater decrees, and those are the first ones to get cut. We have a lot of senior decrees that don't fully meet their decreed area because of these neighbor disputes and because ranches have been chopped up. And I see that as we're just doubling down on the impact of shortage and administrative shortages. So I'd like to continue talking to the River District staff about the soil moisture monitoring to figure out if there's a way to enter more data into the system and to make it usable, but then also think about how we react to it. And if there's an avenue in the near future to do more education and outreach in Uray County, I'm all for it and would really encourage that and would help organize it if need be. So thank you.
I just want to, Director Dennison, so far, it's not something that you have to leave in as a sole person. The only director who's attended 2 State of the River meetings. He's a lot for punishment went to both the one in Montrose and in Uray. So we appreciate that.
It wasn't a long drive for either one.
It's halfway between both. of them.
Yeah.
Ours to come out soon. I'll send you that.
Scott?
The real focus I'll talk about is the Shoshone. So Mason County is very strongly in support of the Shoshone, but we've had some political events that occurred in Mason County recently. First of all, Larry Cleaver, who's run Butte Water for 30 years. I mean, probably the most powerful person in the county on water and a big supporter of Shoshone, and they 2 million. They committed 2 million, didn't they? So he's retiring, and but I think he's making sure that his successor will be groomed the same kind of support. So I see that very stable. The current city council that we have in Grand Junction is just from a nonpartisan point of view, but is perceived as leans liberal. That council is very supportive. They committed, they've come in, but then they decided, or some of them, or the planning commission decided that Grand Junction should be a new 15-minute city. We try to push traffic off, put bikes on, and put a bunch of white plastic poles all over the streets. And didn't read the tea leaves. So needless to say, their term is expiring, not by choice. And so the city council has changed. And I wasn't sure that was going to be successful, the effort, but nonetheless, I've covered the base with the new city council people, and they've all committed.
Well, in Grand Junction has led by example. I just want to say the city, not only have they committed their $1 million in funds, they've actually paid it into escrow. And that funds, those funds were paid and are sitting there earning interest on behalf of the city but nonetheless, they're there. So
And a part of that was concern that there might be success in throwing some of them off.
Yeah.
And they read that tea leaf right. It was kind of funny. I was at the post office when they first put these white posts in your town. It's happened in Durango.
Around Denver, they're everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just was standing there waiting for my wife to get her something in the post office. Man, that I was in Congress, in the State House, Commissioner, 4 or 5 different people. We're not gonna forget what you're doing. I was, wait, I'm not even in office anymore. So we got back. So that's stabilized. And we also, the city manager of Grand Junction, this was not forced out or anything. He took the job in Scottsdale. And we now have the city manager in Grand Junctions, the former city manager in Fruta. And I don't anticipate any problem there. So that's all stabilized. But along with that, I do want to, as I've said before, one other thing I'll mention real quick. You may not be aware of this, but Mesa County, about 78% of our property or land in Mesa County is already owned by the government, state, whatever, 78%. Of the remaining private property, which is about 540,000 acres, of that, 23% to about 25% of that is locked up in perpetuity by conservation easements. And they've had so much success in locking, in checkerboarding, by the way, these conservation easements. Their new target, they've now expanded their mission to go with water rights to lock them in place. Now that, most of these conservation easements do not have what they say are learning provisions. In other words, they have zero flexibility. And now all of a sudden, it's come to some folks' attention. Wow, well, we'll just do this and call the local people, hold those, not local group people, but the local group, which by the way is down in Delta County and Montrose County. People are starting to wake up that, look, you don't have that kind of flexibility. And we probably have the largest percentage of private property of any county in Colorado.
in conservation.
In conservation easements. And I would say that the majority of those are held by out-of-town holders. So, and most of that money comes out of Denver. A lot of that money comes out of lottery sales, things like that. But anyway, it's causing a real problem. But the final thing and the most important thing is we have our ditch companies down there are very strong, very organized. They get along great. And our leadership here at the River District comes down every quarter and meets with them. And we have we probably a 3-hour meeting. And Andy's got his staff. And it's full attendance by the leaders of these ditch companies. And boy, we have a great relationship. And it's really been, not that the relationship was bad, but you've done a great job. Your staff's done a great job. They're fully prepared. The people that we meet with aren't just people off the main street. These people know what the hell they're talking about. So every question they ask has got, well, most questions have merit, but it's got substance to it. And so thanks again. And it really helps us down there. So politics is stable, full support, ready to go.
Sonia?
Good. So same kind of message in Gunnison. We just completed our airborne snow flights on April 7th. My thanks to the Community Planning Commission for their $50,000 contribution to these flights. Snowmelt is well underway. Snowpack temperatures were high and they said it's clearly started. I think we're going to see that peak in stream flow, early June, probably. Irrigators, where there is ice on the ditches, are starting to break that up and get the water going on early. So we get advantage of those early spring runoffs to try to get water onto those fields and get their crops started. Same kind of message, calving season has gone really well because of the good temperatures. That's a positive thing. We're continuing with our ag return flow study. This is our second year. The whole idea, I think, was to try to get those big snow years, some of the lower snow years, to understand what's happening with irrigation return flows and groundwater, what those impacts are. So I think this year is going to be a tough year for the Upper Gunnison Basin, and we will be able to capture some much needed data, I guess, on that side. Lower Valley soil moisture is really dry. There's not any snow in the lower irrigated areas. With the ASO flight, we weren't really successful in flying the North Fork and the Gunnison really close together. There was probably, I think the North Fork flew on the 27th, and the East and the Taylor flew on the April 7th. We were hoping they could be a little bit closer together with regard to the coordinated operations of the releases for the record of decision or the Aspinall unit. But anyway, maybe some work to do with the CASM group. My understanding is that they're crunching everything in because it's been so warm that they couldn't bring a plane from California and get it here fast enough. So I think there's still some more work to do with the CASM group. Our State of the River event is tomorrow. So my thanks to the River District for coming down to that. And speaking to Lindsay, she indicated there were 65 people registered, and we're still, I'm sorry? Awesome. Yeah, just using all of our social media and stuff to kind of advertise that event. And then cloud seeding, we had really good cloud seeding opportunities in January and February, it's usually opposite of that, but this year that's kind of the way it worked out. March wasn't great. Raquel and I both participated in a presentation given by Sarah Tessendorf, who's been working with the Bureau of Reclamation and others on studying where the most suitable locations would be for cloud seeding efforts and where you could get the biggest bang for your buck. So that's been really interesting to listen into. I did participate in a Colorado PL 566 collaborative, and this is the watershed protection and flood prevention funds that the River District used years ago in our RCPP for the Gunnison Basin. But it's a group that got together to kind of talk about what's been working well in PL 566, what changes have been beneficial, but also a lot of the issues that they're still having with getting access to that funding, getting engineering done and planning done, and then moving towards construction. So that's been a really good group to participate in. There is a lot of concern, I think, in the state of Colorado around the impacts to with the firing of some of the NRCS federal employees and what that's meant. So for the Gunnison Basin, Charbonneau Conservation District, and those NRCS offices, they had just gotten, I believe, 3 new engineers, and we've lost them again. So now they have 4 to 5 planners and 0 engineers. My understanding from my staff in an update recently was that they're going to be continuing to fund the salinity control irrigation infrastructure projects, but they're not funding any other ag infrastructure projects. So that's unfortunate. I think also just irrigation water management specialists. There's one at the Gunnison Conservation District who's been supported by some NRCS funding. We don't know whether we'll have that position anymore, which is unfortunate. And then finally, just I think leading into the summer and this drought year, a big concern about the firing of federal employees. We had just started to build up our staffing at the U.S. Forest Service again, and have since had all of those probationary employees fired. So it leaves us very, very nervous about the summer season and fire. And so we're also working with the counties and others to see if we can't backfill and fund some summer technician positions that could be out there doing education and outreach, looking for campfires that have been left unattended and things like that to try to bolster up our protection of our federal lands. And so that's something I'm concerned about. And then just on a positive note, I was just looking at the forecast and it's saying that hopefully we'll get 8 to 14 inches, maybe starting through a lot of parts in Colorado. It seems like the storm's going to track a little bit more to the south, so that could be a good thing for the Gunnison Basin. So crossing my fingers for 8 to 12 inches.
Sonia, give me a call about the Forest Service and temporary staff. We think we figured out a workaround in Eagle County, but it's devastating for us.
Yeah.
Us too.
Yeah.
So in the last couple of years, not only the Upper Gunnison, but also the River District have helped people in the Coach Truck drainage. Also in Saguache County, basically, so everyone appreciates that, and I think we'll see more and more grant applications that way. We've had an extreme amount of wind. We've had several snowstorms that have been 6 to 8 inches. But it's gone like within hours, so it good and bad at the same time. It means it's wet and hopefully going in somewhat, but we're really dry. It was nice to see Senator Hickenlooper here, and I think that's always good that our senators are behind a project. So Shoshone, I would think, could possibly get some more funding just by their, I'm sure they'll have articles that or Senator Hickenlooper was here, so that's have some on. The biggest threat I feel right now is that dredge and fill, so I'm glad that everyone's working on that and can at least maybe understand a little bit of what's going on. Fire concerns are very high. There's still snow, probably 10,000 feet from my house. We're at 10,000 feet. But it's going fast, but I talked to my son a little bit ago and he said that it rained really, really well in Saguache yesterday, and no one was at my ranch, so I'm not sure what it did there, but we can only hope. Thankfully, we didn't have the winds that Stan Winery had. Our winds were high enough and devastating, but it just seems like anything's gonna be there, it's the wind. So if we can figure out how to do that or stop that, that would be good. Thank you.
Well,
Okay, so this isn't about water, the first comment, but I've had a couple of people ask me, so I'm gonna say that, what about the closure of the coal plants? Has that changed since the election? No, it hasn't. The reason the coal plants in our area are closing is not because of federal regulations, because of state emission standards that can't be met anymore by design. So that's still ongoing. They're gonna close. So another water project that is going on in the county is this pumped hydro. You may have heard about it, and that's sounds like it's gonna happen. Doesn't use a lot of water. It really is, regardless of how you feel about renewables, it is what you need to make renewables work. So sounds like that's gonna go ahead. It'll bring some economy to the county, at least during construction. It's billions of dollars. Literally, over $1 billion. I can't see how.
Making what things cost these days.
I guess so, yeah. Sticker shock again. Yeah, we're preparing for a probable low flows, and while we focus in these meetings, and we all back home, we all been focusing on a lot on the macro water issues, the interstate issues, and Lake Powell reservoir levels and all that. But we've, since 2018, when we've had the first call ever on the AMPA, locally on the micro, I guess I'll call them micro water issues, we've been focusing on what can we do about our low flow problems. And we don't have a lot of storage, but we began then to figure out how to use what storage we have to augment flows. There was a water fund created that helps fund through the Colorado Water Trust releases from both Stagecoach and Elkhead. We haven't needed all those flows the last couple of years because we've had pretty good natural flows, especially the Elkhead flows haven't, if tapped at all, were very small. But we're going to have that water fund meeting here soon, and there's about $250,000 in the grant pool this year. We had $407,000 worth of applications, so we'll be going through those apps. But the number one priority always is, and I can guarantee you, we're gonna focus on that this year. If I have anything to say about it, it's gonna be those flow releases and paying for them, because the probabilities are that we're gonna need them. We've been, because of the over appropriation designation, we've been focusing on the measurement rules. We've had those measurement rules more sooner than the rest of this Western Slope thing.
Yeah, we were the trial child.
Yeah, I think there's still people having to comply that haven't quite, but most of everybody is complied by now. I know one guy is still getting some grant money from the upper Yampa Conservancy District for measuring devices that they have on their little grant program, and so things are going pretty well, I guess, for our local planning. I feel like I don't like it that it's dry, but I'm convinced it's gonna be dry. I feel like, well, some of the planning and the things that we've put into place since 2018 are paying off, and so that's about all I have to say for our county.
Thank you, Tom. Well, it sounds like we're all pretty much in the same boat. You'll be dragging bottom before.
Beached.
Say we're beached.
Beached, yeah, we'll be dragging bottom before the end of the summer. Anyway, thank you all, appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Next item on the agenda, Mr. President, is the Community Funding Partnership Program update. We'll just say that, as I mentioned yesterday, unfortunately, the USGS hydrologist Katie Walton Day was unable to get authorization to travel or appear virtually to our meeting. So we're going to postpone that discussion to another day on the harmful algal blooms in Blue Mesa. I think it is a really interesting subject and one that's applicable across the district as we see rising temperatures and more algae. There's an update memo in your packet on CFP. We weren't planning on having a presentation, trying to keep the meeting on track, but if anybody, a member of board of directors, has a question for our CFP team, they're more than happy to answer questions right now or certainly later. So, yes, Sonia.
I was gonna ask whether you're hearing concerns from many of your constituents about the lack of funding for the infrastructure or water infrastructure coming, whether you feel like there's gonna be a lot more pressure on the program?
Yeah, we're very concerned about the lack of funding on water infrastructure. Remember, the state, they're and I know, Sonia, you know this, but the state has these two pots of money essentially for water funding primarily, and water supply reserve fund is that's really aimed at infrastructure. Ostensibly, so is the Colorado water plant funding that comes through from the gambling taxes, and other sources, but it requires much more multi-purpose kind We are working, the CFP team and others at the district are working on trying to kind of reset our funding priorities and the way we operate that program with what appears to be at least a pretty good likelihood of federal funding not being present in the water infrastructure environment and frankly, water funding environment. And so we're working through some ideas and concepts right now. Certainly infrastructure, aging infrastructure repair is high among our priorities. And so how do we do that? We know that as great as our fund is, it will never fix the aging infrastructure problem on the West Slope. And so we're going to have to continue to look at that as a catalyst or a leverage to attract other funding. And the question is, how do we do that? It will be a lot of work, both at the state and federal level to get that where it needs to be, frankly. So, yeah. Great. We're going to turn to external. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just a quick question, Melissa, how do you allocate the Shoshone funding among the counties?
It all goes to Eagle.
Specifically, money. Amy will know the delineation more specifically, but it is allocated every year a portion so that we are equipped by 2027 to have enough to give the full 20.
No, I just mean, how does it go to the
But
counties?
geographically, yeah, so, I'll have to look back at our,
our memo when we approved the Shoshone contribution in December 2023. My recollection is we allocated 75% of the 20 million to the 5 main stem counties and then 25% to all of our other counties across the district, noting the broad statewide benefits and broad benefits across our district. Thank you.
That 75% is allocated equally among the 5.
Correct, yes. Okay.
So real quickly, in our strategic plan, we talked about, how do we move forward and the rest. So you brought up the algae situation. I think all of our reservoirs are facing algae problems. All of our districts or counties are facing algae situations. If they're not, they will. And just because, not just because, but because of the effects of climate change, warming or whatever, in that drought, less water going in, less water going out. And then that water becomes warmer and the rest. And so, so I would hope that the district would find it in its way, not to be the ramrod or whatever, but be the convener of bringing these local, because I have advocated all along, the algae problem in Gunnison County can't be that much different than the algae problem that we're having in Stagecoach Reservoir. I mean, yeah, they've got different inputs and the rest. We just got done doing a local study with our algae going into Steamboat, into a Stagecoach Reservoir. And we did a field application and an in-depth study, because everybody wants to point at us sorry, whiny farmers, ranchers, and the fertilizer that we're putting on and or the cows that we have out on there. And to say that, well, we did this study and we just had a presentation a couple of months ago that the water going into this field was the same water going out of the field, and that we put applications on, had cattle running on it all winter, and this water going in was the same water going out, and it wasn't them whiny ranchers. So anyhow, as we move forward, I think there's a great opportunity to make sure that all of these basins and reservoirs are talking to each other, and that would be something that we can really convene in. So I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you.
Director Munger, I appreciate those comments, and I think that's a lot of what we focus on with the community funding partnership, the algae issues in particular. We've been able to work with Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District to help support some of their decision-making tools and models.
Right.
We sat down with them and said, hey, you should really connect with Director Chavez and what's happening at Blue Mesa, knowing that a lot of the water quality issues are site-specific, but the goal of our program is we can have this bird's eye view of how to connect our constituents and issues working on similar challenges and see where there's area of overlap. So Dr. Chavez.
We shouldn't all have to individually learn
Right.
same issues.
Okay. We'll move on.
Yep, thank you very much. Information and outreach, external affairs, we'll start with Matt and Lindsay.
Excuse me. Thank you all for the time, for being here. External affairs has been busy in the first quarter. We, as always, wear a bunch of different hats. And this quarter is no different. The Shoshone campaign, from a media relations, communication standpoint, remains a priority. And we stay nimble and closely in touch with leadership on how and when we're doing external communications efforts around Shoshone. It's been a closely monitored and scrutinized effort. We stay really close on a day-to-day basis of that. Additionally, a lot of planning for the State River events. Thank you all for helping us promote those in your counties, in each area, and for attending when you're available. And I'm sure you all read the memo, but just kind of running through high level, community funding partnership is a focus for 2025. And we made a significant effort in the first quarter to kick off some of the communications around CFP and highlight the successes of the program, including the use of the annual report
I'm sure you all received your copies of, and I'm proud of that product. We want to get the most out of it. We put a lot of time and energy in the creation of it. And as we round the corner to the 5-year anniversary of the program, we're looking to do more storytelling around CFP, and we'll talk more about that and about how we plan to shape future communications with the changing landscape of CFP available funding. Also, if you noticed in the news drop, which we'll talk more about in a minute, there's a dedicated section called the CFP Corner where we're looking to highlight project updates, program updates, do a little more communication around on the ground effects of program and efforts of the River District through the funding arm at CFP, and demonstrate how it makes real difference out there on the ground. So like I mentioned, events, State of the Rivers. I'll let Lindsay talk a little bit more about.
Stephanie, can you keep that up? Thanks. Thank you all so much for those of you who have attended State of the Rivers, and for those of you who have exchanged phone calls and emails back and forth on speakers and adjustments and input. It's always appreciated. It's a significant investment of staff time and River District resources to run such an extensive event series. We are doing 11 separate events, and we're kind of right in the middle right now, a little bit past the middle with 6 behind us and 5 to come. We've had great attendance so far, some of the best that we've seen in a while. And I think this week and next week's actually at Grand Valley and Grand Junction is looking exceptionally popular. So buckle up, they're all going to be there. And I would also just like to thank these other partner organizations, the local water conservancy districts, because it's a great way for our staff to just get back in touch with the local priorities and things like that. Boy, folks who might not be able to take a whole Friday off to attend the seminar, and who definitely are not a big fan of tuning into board meetings, but who are going to show up if there's dinner and there's local faces that they recognize. So again, really enjoying that. Our staff also has been doing a lot of speaking events. We've gone to 30 different organizations in the past quarter to present, and you can see a list of those in your memo. And then we also have been active in the media, although not trying to be the first name in the media right now. We're just, there's a lot going on, a lot of big headlines that River District does not need to be in front of. So we've had about 30 stories run with us.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, inching towards 200 attendees in the Grand Valley next week. So we're excited about that. Our digital outreach, as mentioned, the news drop is a focus. It's a growing, it continues to be a growing platform. It's somewhere in the 8,000 subscriber count right now, and continues to have a really high open rate. People read it, they click on the links, and so there's a lot of internal discussion about what's included in the news drop. We intend to continue to be very thoughtful about what's showcased there, and want to continue to use that as an opportunity to showcase River District work product that's created. There's a lot here from the technical team, from the CFP program and beyond that is accomplished and deserves a showcase and a spotlight. News drop is a good spot for that. We'll continue to find spots for it. Upcoming this year, we're also doing a short film around CFP as we've done in the past. We were under a contract with a new contractor from here in the Roaring Fork Valley that is an accomplished filmmaker. So that work is underway. And as mentioned, lots of mentions in media. She stays really close with our media contacts out there. And keep it going as we move forward through the year. Any questions?
Who's the contractor?
Name's Oliver Sutro. He works with
No poaching.
Yeah, he works with the Colorado Outdoors companies over there in Montrose, often doing fishing related and fisheries related conservation films and work. He's accomplished and won a bunch of awards. I've worked with him a little bit in the past.
Yes. Real quick, if you guys have a minute after the meeting, I'd like to just touch base on the upcoming State of the River Summit, just one a little bit more than our quick discussion earlier.
Seemed like Carbondale was really well attended.
Carbondale was well attended, 130.
130,
Yeah.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and energetic and good presentation. Yeah, I mean, kudos to Lindsay and everybody here who's contributed to State of the River events. It's kind of an all staff all hands effort, a lot of logistics, you know, from roping in speakers to setting up banners and getting catering. Haley has been foster in that, so. We're having a good season for it. Well, thank you very much, Matt, Lindsay, appreciate you guys being here. Mr. President, the state affairs would be next, and Mr. Kessler is on family leave, enjoying his new daughter, who's awfully cute, along with his older son. But Amy and I are gonna cover state affairs and federal affairs. I'm gonna apologize in advance for federal affairs because it's primarily me, so state affairs are gonna be good.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Thank you, directors. We are nearing the very end of the legislative session, so I am gonna pinch hit a little bit here, like Andy mentioned, to jump into state affairs. Certainly the legislative session is moving quickly now that it's nearing the completion on May 7th. So we have 2 bills that we sent around Monday evening for potential action that we wanted to walk through today. And then a few bills to give some updates of what's been happening and some issues that we've been tracking. So the first bill for recommended action is Senate Bill 25-283. That is the annual CWCB water projects bill. It has long been sponsored by the chairs in both the House and Senate, the chairs and vice chairs of the House Agriculture and Water, or the Agriculture and Water Committees. This year, the CWCB water projects bill is appropriating a little over 53 million in water projects across DNR and primarily through the Colorado Water Conservation Board. This year also includes a $500,000 transfer to the Department of Agriculture for the Soil Health Program. My understanding is that's fulfilling a water plan agency action to support that program. There's a few highlights that I included in your summary of notes, including 5 million to continue the Wildfire Ready Watersheds program. That's a program where a number of our West Slope communities are working towards. So I think at the staff level, we're certainly supportive of seeing continued funds for that program. I did want to highlight that it also is appropriating $4.5 million to support the Basin Implementation Plan analysis and updates. So that's moving forward with the cycle of a water plan update. And then $2 million to support the Yampa River and Walton Creek Confluence Restoration Project. Finally, the bill also includes a $29.2 million transfer from sports betting revenues to continue to support the water plan grants program. So we continue to see, and we'll talk here in just a minute, the importance of sports betting in providing a diversified and additional revenue stream to support water project grants within the Colorado Water Conservation Board. The bill has been moving quickly since its introduction. It has already passed out of the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee unanimously. It was then referred to Senate Finance. It passed unanimously out of that committee, and it's scheduled to be heard next in Senate Appropriations. So at the staff level, we are recommending support and we'd answer any questions.
Sonia?
Amy, I have any knowledge on the money that's being set aside for the Basin Implementation Plan analysis and updates? Is that going to support us this year? Because I know in our BIP update for the Gunnison Basin, you know, when we first did it, we had JUB Engineers as our local support. And this year they wanted us to update it, but there was just zero support. So we've kind of been scrambling and trying to get all the projects together and stuff. Do you know?
My understanding, Director Chavez, is it's in the future years and part of the cyclical process of the water plan update where it starts with the technical analysis, then moves through the process where basin implementation plans can be updated, and that then leads to the update to the water plan.
Okay.
I believe it's running on a 10-year cycle at this point, but if other of our staff that sit on basin roundtables have anything to, that's my understanding.
Thank you. I'd make a motion to support.
Okay,
Go ahead.
but I do want to make sure we have public online and at least one member of the public here, and the board's commitment has been to take an opportunity to get public input before the board votes, and I
Okay.
give that opportunity.
Well, any of the public that are tuned in or that are here in the room, are there any comments from our public?
Seeing none online and none in the room. Sorry to
So,
interrupt.
it's all right.
Director
That's
Chop.
what we need to do. So we need a second for Sonia's Francie. We have a motion and a second to support. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? So we'll be supporting that bill. All right.
The second bill for recommended action is House Bill 25-1311. This has to do with deductions that are currently allowed under the sports betting tax. So again, sports betting has become an influential revenue source for water projects in our state. Currently, sports betting companies are allowed to deduct customer recruitment or free bets. If you've seen some of those commercials, what this bill does, and it's sponsored by House Speaker Julie McCluskey, Representative Matt Soper in the House, and the Senate sponsor is Senator Dylan Roberts. What this bill does is eliminate that tax write-off. It does not change the current 10% threshold of sports betting tax. But what has effectively happened is with a series of deductions, that effective tax rate is much lower than 10%. And so by eliminating this deduction associated with free bets, the fiscal note currently estimates that this would generate 11.8 million in additional sports betting revenue, of which the vast majority goes to water projects and the Colorado Water Conservation Board, where that funding goes directly to the Water Plan Grants Program. That money would start accruing in fiscal year 2025-2026. The way that sports betting revenue works is an arrears model, so we would expect that to hit the Water Plan Implementation Cash Fund in fiscal year 2026-2027. So at the staff level, again, we see sports betting revenue as critical as a source of diversified revenue for CWCB. They are very reliant on severance taxes to fund a majority of their water projects. And as we know well, that's a very volatile and unpredictable revenue stream. So we are recommending that we support this bill. It is expected to have its first hearing in the House Finance Committee next Monday on April 21st.
It's an email that Amy
Oh,
sent
that's why I can't put it.
Monday.
Yeah, okay, now.
Are there any other questions? Not, we need a motion to support that bill.
Anything from the public?
Oh. Anything else from the public? I can't see you on the screen, so I forget you're there. We have one in the room. Please come forward.
I'd just like to make a comment that it's a really important funding source for all of Colorado, and it'd be great to see the funding go to water projects instead of to sports betting companies, so.
And this is Orla Bannon with
Excuse
Western
me.
Resource Advocates.
Sorry, for the record, Orla Bannon with Western Resource Advocates. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
We have a motion.
Move to support.
Motion by Chandler Henry, second by Reedy. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right.
We have two bills, just this is a quick update. House Bill 25-1323. This was a bill that originated from the governor's office, was a priority bill for the Department of Natural Resources. Its intent was to strengthen Colorado Parks and Wildlife's role in outdoor recreation. It would have established a non-motorized trails program, a year-round motorized trails program, and create a river recreation program for CBW. And before I get too much further, the reason I'm talking in past tense is that the bill was introduced and fairly quickly postponed indefinitely by the bill sponsors. We wanted to give a quick update, given that in a short time frame, this bill garnered a lot of discussion and attention from local government entities, agriculture and water organizations that requested additional dialogue, given its introduction as a late bill, very late in the session. So the bill sponsors did honor that it appeared there needed to be more discussion, needed to be more understanding of the need for the bill. So again, it was postponed indefinitely at the request of the bill sponsors in the House Agriculture, Water and Natural Resources Committee earlier this week on April 14th. we wanted to just give the board a quick update as how the staff had participated in this bill, keeping in very close alignment with our board policies, given how quickly it was moving. So what we did was we requested an amendment to DNR and the bill sponsors to include essentially a savings clause that we lifted from the Water Quality Control Act to ensure that there was no impairment, no injury to water rights. That concept was well received by DNR and the bill sponsors and was included within a circulated amendment before the bill was completely pulled and postponed indefinitely. We do expect that this concept may come up in the interim period, it may come up in a future legislative session. So we felt like it was important just to give you a quick update on this bill, knowing that it is not moving forward this session.
And I just want to point out, I mean, sometimes our policy review process can be a little arduous for the board and staff. It is really important to have policies in place because it's what provides guidance for us when we step into a legislative action like this, where we can't get a board direction before, because it was actually introduced last week and scheduled for a Monday hearing in the House committee. And we needed to step into that and following board direction and the policies, we were able to get that, suggest that savings clause. And so, staff is very careful in those instances to say, look, our board hasn't weighed in. We don't know if the board's going to support, oppose, but this is one issue we know is a problem for our district and you need to put this language in. And to the credit of DNR, they were more than happy to listen and happy to put that amendment. Our constituents, I will tell you, had lots of other issues. You've probably heard of them or yourself have those issues with that bill. We looked at it from a water supply perspective. There were concerns because it also contained a bunch of CPW trails management plans. And so CCI came out against it. The ditch companies that have major ditch roads came out against it, a number of others. And so those are important issues. They aren't directly water supply, water issues from the staff's perspective. And so we didn't weigh in on those issues, but we did weigh in on the water right implications of this bill.
I just had a quick question. Is there a fiscal note to this bill if it would have passed? And as I look at the deficit that they're dealing with, I'm asking this question is, what are they thinking about passing new fiscal note programs when they can't pay for what they got?
There was a fiscal note associated with this bill. I don't have it pulled up currently. I absolutely can, but my understanding is that it would, the impact of this bill would have been absorbed over multiple future years in Colorado Parks and Wildlife and would have added additional staff for a number of these programs from the outdoor recreation spectrum to the river recreation as well. And so it was phased into the bill in a multi-year process. So happy to share that fiscal note because it was developed knowing that the bill had some amendments being worked on and then again was postponed indefinitely. So we'll be very much up for discussion and we may see a very different piece of legislation if it comes back.
Yeah. Legislative math, both at the state level and the federal level, is a bit astounding these days. It's just
different than what we operate under.
Yes, was this proposed initially by the Wildlife Commission or?
I don't believe it was proposed by the Wildlife Commission, but I can work into that.
Sonia?
I think there was a concern also that there was pretty radical kind of stream access coalition kind of behind this, the perspective. And, it's in the Upper Gunnison, we had a lot of fights on the Taylor River with regarding property rights and stream access and boaters and stuff. And so while there are some good things, and I think there are pressure on some of our river systems, especially during drought and fisheries, and some sort of management might be necessary. I think our board also had concerns about CPW kind of getting their house in order because there's a lot of land and water management that doesn't happen adequately right now. And we'd like to see some of those things actually improve before we add another recreational management mandate on top of them, I think. So.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of concerns about access to private property in regards to canal bank roads or anything that looks like a trail. And that concern about stream access has lit a lot of lamps. It's gonna take some real conversations before they can draft a bill that will keep people at least neutral, because it was really hot right away. So,
So if anybody, you all familiar or hopefully familiar with the Mad Rabbit system going on in Route County and the conflict between parks and wildlife. So how do we trust them that they're gonna take care of us? Or are we gonna trust them to, emphasize the parks or the wildlife? And, so, yeah, this is pretty concerning about how, and then who's the watchdog on it? The CPW commission? So, yeah.
maybe you can fill us in on what's Mad Rabbit.
So Mad Rabbit is this big trails that's going out into the, it's been in the works for, over, 10 year or 15 years. It's on the National Forest. And the city of Steamboat Springs passed a lodging tax back in ages ago. And so they were funding $1.4 million out of this. And so, there's an article in the Colorado Sun today talking about that. They had, so basically was opening up half of the range between Jackson County and Route County, that whole range there between Ravagers Pass up to Mad Creek for bike trails. And, fine bike trails, but when is enough is enough, and how much bike trails do we need? And then they had agreed, the Forest Service had agreed to do some wildlife studies to integrate the implementation of the plan based on the wildlife studies. And so what happens is they decided they're not gonna do those wildlife studies. And they're just gonna continue to pass the Forest Service passed their rules, and so they are gonna allow these new trails to happen. And I mean, that's after we had already bought, acquired a BLM parcel behind the city of Steamboat Springs for bike access as well. And I'm not against bike access, but how much is enough? And when is enough is enough? And so now the ones that are gonna get hit are us private landowners that are gonna be feeding the 1,000 head of elk sitting on our meadows because they got run off of the national forest.
Yeah, I want to completely support you on that because in this area, we have excessive mountain biking, as you can imagine, and the Crystal River drainage has a BLM basically access. It has a big parking lot with tons of biking up above, which has completely fractured our local elk herd. And now on our place down below, the elk are there year round and really do a lot of damage to our crops. But I also, for full transparency, my son is on the Wildlife Commission, just so you know.
God bless him.
He's very much pro wildlife rather than bikes, just so you know.
You want to finish up yours?
Yes, the last quick update we have is on House Bill 25-1211. That was the TAP fee bill related to special districts. We have been keeping an eye on where this bill has been heading. It does look like it's on its way towards the governor's desk. It's now passed out of the Senate, been concurred by the House. The Colorado Water Congress has also been tracking this bill and had formed a subcommittee looking at a number of issues, primarily looking at including language that would acknowledge existing contractual obligations or agreements that special districts have on TAP fees, and also looking at exemptions for small districts that would serve less than 3,300 taps. There were amendments added to the bill in the Senate that provided additional clarity that any contracts that currently exist regarding TAP fees would still apply, but they did not take up any amendments looking at exemptions for small districts. And so we understand that concerns certainly remain related to that issue. This will be overall an issue that we'll continue to track and monitor and bring back to the board as it may come up in future sessions. The origination of this concept was related to affordable housing conversations at the state capitol. So just a quick update of where that bill ended up, and a lot of work from the Colorado Water Congress and other special districts across the state.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Amy.
Wait, I gotta help.
Yeah, this is a short one. As the Colorado River, or I'm getting my companies mixed up. Has the Colorado Rural Water Association weighed in on here? Because I haven't seen their name anywhere. And I don't see them involved in any projects, even though this is a national organization that many water utilities weigh into. And I'm not looking for you to do extra work. I'm just curious, did they weigh in at all? Because if you didn't, I'm gonna raise hell with them.
Yeah, Director Vandenbrink, I don't know the answer to that. I'm happy to track it down, and work with our local lobbying team at the state capitol to.
Save yourself some time. I'll call them up and I'll
I
ask.
don't know.
Yeah, okay, good question.
Sonia?
When I asked some of our small special districts who they were working with, they indicated it was the Water and Wastewater Utilities Associations,
Okay.
and that's the way they were weighing in, but I haven't seen Sierra Colorado Rural Water either, so it's interesting. This is a big deal, I think, for small communities and special districts where when you have large infrastructure projects or things that just have to be fixed and you have to incorporate how you're gonna pay it back. I don't know how that cap is gonna work. It's gonna be very difficult. So.
Well, Amy, you should stay up here for federal affairs because you're gonna have to cover me, so. All right, well, moving on to federal affairs thing, just a couple of things. I'm not, Zane's memo covers some of the appeals in agencies that we see at any time there's an administration change. They're ongoing and somewhat fluid, as has been alluded to by a number of board members here. We're tracking them, but honestly, I will say the second Trump administration is moving much faster than the first Trump administration to get people into place. Generally, that's a good thing because just keeping those agencies running is important from our perspective. I do want to just mention that there are a couple water bills in Congress that have been introduced that we're keeping an eye on. The reauthorization of the System Conservation Pilot Program is being sponsored by Harriet Hageman in the House. She's the Wyoming Congresswoman. Given its implementation within our state without any sideboards, we're taking direction from the board that we're not very excited about this. Had the opportunity to discuss that directly with Congresswoman Hageman, who understands our concerns, and frankly, our concerns are shared by most of the Wyoming farmers and ranchers that I've met in water districts over there. So it wasn't new to her, but it is still being pushed. I would tell you that our Senator Hickenlooper is also behind that in the Senate. We have expressed our district's position on that as well to Hickenlooper and his staff. But that continues to move forward. It is temporary, and I think the good thing is it would only authorize the System Conservation Pilot Program through 2026, meaning that it will only be, if it gets reauthorized, it will only be for 1 year. So at this point, because it's not going to impact this water year. So it is not the end of the world if it is authorized. The Water Right Protection Act of 2025, for those of you who were on the board back in the 2010s will remember Scott Tipton introducing this bill, or a very similar bill. The idea being that there are concerns, some of them legitimate, that federal agencies, as part of lease obligations or leases that they enter into for use of federal land, were requiring lessees to turn over their water rights that are located on those federal leaseholds, stock ponds, other water rights that they may have filed on as water rights as individuals long ago. This act would prohibit agriculture and interior departments from doing that to water users. So I believe that bill may move forward within the House. I don't know that it will move forward in the Senate, given the filibuster requirements. The other bill that's out there that again, Representative Hegman from Wyoming is introducing is and I think we see a Senate companion bill to that as well. Which is basically seeking to have interior balance hydropower and fish releases. There's a perspective that the spiking flows out of both the Glen Canyon Dam and Flaming Gorge for the benefit of the fish that require the use of bypass tubes in those dams. It's a loss of revenue for the power for WAPA and other power agencies at a time where electric power is necessary and needed. So the concept is to try to balance that instead of allowing one interest to dominate over the other. I don't know that the likelihood of that passing. I just want to touch on something. It's the Fix Our Forest Act. This is an act that Senator Hickenlooper is actually, as of this week, a co-sponsor on in the Senate. It is with his joining that, it's a bipartisan action to expedite permitting. And I think this is a new update from what's in the memo. We were contacted by his office last week that they were making this announcement. He had been engaged with the Republican sponsors on this bill before, but the idea is to expedite certain NEPA requirements on forest health projects in important areas. They define those important areas primarily as fire sheds. Fire sheds definition appears to come from a 2019 act that we as a district have had some issues with because it prioritizes health, the funding from the federal government through the Department of Agriculture into areas that are based upon the value of the human infrastructure, which then therefore focuses the money on, and within our state, on the urban front range, wildland urban interface, rather than focusing it on the watershed that actually provides those people with their drinking water, right? And we felt like we had made some traction with Senator Bennett, who sits on the Senate Ag Committee. This bill does not seem to, at least in our first reading of it, to fix that problem and prioritize watersheds that provide water for 40 million people. So we do think that we'll try to work with Senator Hickenlooper and others on that bill. We think it's in general, and unless the district board tells us differently, we do think that speeding up some forest health issues and the ability to get in and assist the forest really makes sense. And expediting those processes so that you're not waiting till the standing bug hill timber is no longer useful or beneficial to the timber industry is important. So that's where we are. And that looks like we've got some comments on this.
Yeah, I don't know much more than I just recollect that there was an executive order that did open up a lot of logging in these national forests right now to start thinning out the timber, to start getting these forests back functioning again.
There is, and I would expect, and pretty sure if I recall correctly, that executive order is actually already subject to litigation. So it seems like all executive orders these days, but so I think the Senate Act may, not that it would be litigation free, but the idea here is NEPA does allow the Senate to create, or the Congress to create exceptions to NEPA and expedite certain processes. And that's what they're trying to do with this act.
And that's where we've regulated ourselves into a corner as a society.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to comment that the danger of focusing money and attention on timber contracts ignores counties like Eagle County, Summit County, Pitkin County, probably all of the high mountain counties that the timber isn't worth anything. The Forest Service issues bids for contracts, nobody takes them up. So when agencies are staffed and funded to reap the benefits of timber, it actually hurts our forest health. So that's something I think that isn't widely known among Eastern and also Oregon and Washington senators and representatives. I don't really understand that timber value isn't
Excellent point.
Particularly if it's been dead too long.
Well, I wanted to make the
5
same
years.
point that, sorry,
Go ahead,
Director
Jay.
Kellen, want to make the same point that Director Chandler Henry made. The timber that we need to have harvested isn't marketable.
Right.
No one's trying to make a dollar off a
You
bunch
gotta
of
pay them to
pinyon.
do it, Pat.
But our pinyon juniper forests haven't been managed or burned, and we've missed 5 fire cycles in most of our forests. And it's not places that people are putting cows either. It's not viable permanent ground. There's no grass growing there because of the forest health issues. So, and then the other parts of our county are just flat out too darn steep to log. Like, you're not putting a skidder above your A. It's just not gonna happen. So for watershed health and for water security, these things need to happen. But making the sale and releasing it, and then directing that to where there's already logging roads and viable stands that you can access with equipment, 2 different things.
Right.
And I don't think the Fix Our Forest Act is focused. So I think the difference between the Fix Our Forest Acts and the executive order is that it is not focused solely on timber sales. It is focused on forest health and other issues.
At some point, because of the cost of fighting forest fires, we don't need any, this timber sale doesn't need revenue. It's actually be better to pay someone.
Right. That's what we have to do.
And, we once had a viable industry that did harvest those kind of trees and thaw them up, but that got killed. And so we don't have sawmills or loggers or anything anymore. They have to travel and, but I think what you're all saying is right. There are some areas that can't really be logged yet by E-ray, for instance, or something. But, in our area, it's not that steep and there's, the dead timber from the beetles is now not usable, but there certainly could be a viable, not only industry that could help support communities and something going on with, but it's gonna have to be incentivized a little more than now, where they offer a permit to a logging sale, and all the ologists have to be paid that assess all the impacts, and by then they have to have such a high stumpage, everybody goes, I can't pay that.
Okay.
So, a little more thought given to it would probably find a place in the middle that was workable.
And I think that's why, from talking to Senator Hickenlooper staff, that he and they engaged on this to try to find that effective middle point. Whether or not this bill does that and whether or not it has an impact on the federal agencies is remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Right. But that is the intent, and I appreciate the intent. I think we'll continue to engage to work with them on that issue. Last one I just want to mention because it's important for all of us out in the West is the Farm Bill continues to be stalled permanently and is unlikely to go anywhere in this current Congress. So it has continuing resolution authorization, but absolutely no additional funding. And in fact, some of the programs in the Farm Bill, such as if you remember, the Farm Bill contains both industry-oriented subsidies to growers, but it also has found its success in balancing the SNAP or food aid for impoverished citizens in the United States. And that's where it's been successful and gained bipartisan support. There is certainly some budgetary threats being made to the SNAP program as well as others as the new administration comes in and changes its priorities. So that Farm Bill, while it's been successful over the last several decades, because of that balance, may not have that balance anymore. And so it is a difficult path forward on that bill. So, Amy, do you have anything else to add on? No. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. We're going to turn over the next one, which would normally be Zane Kessler's, over to Jason Turner, who drew the shortest draw in the policies. Okay. I should say, he, because of his skill and knowledge, is going to be doing.
Thank you. The discussion is on page 305 of your PDF version of the report, and the policies are redlined. You have 5 policies for consideration and potential readoption today. You considered these policies back in January. Zane added some red lines to those policies based on the comments we received. And let's see, those 5 policies are In-Stream Flows, Endangered Species Act, Recreational Water Use, Colorado Water Plan, and Water Quality. Happy to walk through any of those with any of you, or if you've reviewed them and have comments, we can consider those as well. Additional comments. Again, pursuant to your policies, you take 2 board meetings to review these, so these are subject to readoption today if the board so desires.
What's the board's wishes? You want to walk through them?
Am I missing something? I'm looking at the in-stream flow and I see the background discussion. It looks like we still.
Yeah, I don't see it either,
I was just noticing that as well.
because I would, therefore, or whatever, yeah. So specifically, I was looking for something, you know, that the allocation would be the minimum amount, the whole concept, the minimum amount required to protect what you're trying to protect, and so I see that's all gone.
Isn't it at the top above the background and discussion?
I am not
Don't
seeing
see it.
Yeah, it's cut off. It looks like it's on.
Oh, 30.
309.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I don't see any words in there about the minimum amount required, which was part of the original statute. The minimum amount required to protect the.
I get you.
I mean, we apologize, Mr. Chair, so when the situation on the which river was it down south? The Dolores was going through the big thing and wanted to take all the rest of the water. And we said, well, no, that's not acceptable. So I don't see whether that's really addressed in here, that we need to have the minimum amount required to protect the interest that we're trying to protect. And so I don't know. So that would be my comment. Rest.
That's the,
I mean, I would just say, first that there's no redlining here, so it's readoption of what you already have. Nothing new was proposed or changed, at least from the prior version in 2022. More substantively, while the appropriation of a new in-stream flow water right is required to, is the appropriation of a minimum in-stream flow in the amount necessary to protect the environment, to natural environment to a reasonable degree. The existing law, existing statutory framework allows for in-stream flow water rights from donations, et cetera, sales of existing water rights that are not tied to the minimum amount standard. In other words, you can have an improved standard under, and I think that's, if I can't be sure about this, but if memory serves, and this would be a long time back, the policy was changed to eliminate that minimum amount to the extent that it was even then there originally to acknowledge those dual concepts under the in-stream states in-stream flow.
So we're gonna see this again, right?
Well,
This is
we
the
We
one.
would like to, yes.
If you would like to, yes.
Yeah, I would like to see.
Are there
And
proposed?
again, I guess what Peter says is fine. But I do think that we, that's a different situation than going out and acquiring and from, so the donation concept, I understand that. That's fine. If you want to do that, you can do that. And
Sure. And
allow that.
the-
So, but it ought to be in the policy.
Yeah, then I think the concept there is, at least as I've always looked at it, is that when a new appropriation of a new in-stream flow is coming on, that's in theory, a new demand on the river, just like any new water right, right? So you want to keep that to the minimum amount. The donation concept is not a new demand on the river because they're donating an existing demand on the stream system. And therefore, tying that to the minimum amount is not appropriate because that would change, in theory, in certain circumstances, could change the flow regime of the river. If the board's desire is to build into the policy that distinction, then we can do that.
We can certainly do that and bring it back if that's.
My question is, what would that change?
Well, it'd probably be, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it would require some tweaking of the language and addition of the concepts, two different types of in-stream flows really that you have, the appropriation and the donation concept.
So it refined the policy though. I mean,
It would refine the policy to reflect the board's historic perspective on the creation of new in-stream flows should be the minimum amount. The board has been supportive, and I might draw attention to Shoshone where it is an acquisition that is both improved or the minimum amount necessary to preserve and improve the environment. And so those are actions that this board has supported in the past and currently. And I think we can work with the policy and bring it back in January or July to reflect kind of the difference in creation of an interim flow versus acquisition. So happy to do that.
It's like everybody's in agreement with bringing it back. So you want to go to the next one?
Next one is Endangered Species Act. Got some red line edits reflecting some of the conversation from the last board meeting in there.
Jason, can you remind me what the last paragraph, why we decided to cut all that out? I mean, I'm fine with it. I just can't remember what the discussion. What that was. Just redundant or didn't feel like it was necessary.
My recollection of the conversation is we didn't think it was necessary.
It doesn't seem like it is considering what's in the first sentence.
Right.
Fine with that.
We have a board direction to adopt this.
I move we adopt the revised policy for the Endangered Species Act.
Motion by Chandler Henry, second, Gary Dennison. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Over, motion approved. Be a new policy, or our policy.
Next
Let me get
is-
to the next one.
Recreational water use.
You get there.
I'll work
In
on
the
it later.
background.
Hang on.
Page 313 of
Yeah,
the.
and
313, and yeah, there were no red line edits to this. From the prior discussion.
Make a motion to accept.
Second.
Motion by Jennison, second by Martinez. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes.
Next is Colorado Water Plan. Again, no red line edits from your last review.
Just a comment, I think that section on Trans Mountain diversions is really critical. It comes up from time to time. It came up in the drought task force as, needing to make sure that ends up in any documentation or recommendations, protecting the West Slope water.
Okay, you want to make a motion?
Move we accept the policy on Colorado water plan.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Policy passed.
And the next is water quality. You'll see some red line changes to paragraph 7, and then some additional changes in the background discussion. And Director Chavez, I think those were in 7 were directed towards the comments you had during the meeting.
Yeah, I think so.
Make a motion that we approve the water quality policy.
Motion by Chavez,
Munger second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Policy.
Well done, Mr. Turner. No, if you succeed so well at this.
You might call him.
I was
tell him
gonna
we're getting
suggest
along
you were
good
doing
without
so
him.
well at playing Zane that maybe you.
We'll call him and tell him we're getting along good without him.
Please don't. There are certain skills that guy has that I do not have. So, just want to touch on the future meetings. The particularly our July meeting, we're setting this up for, some optional events, for you, and we've encouraged you to participate and attend whatever part you're able to, and ideally all of it. We recognize that's a pretty big burden. So just to kind of talk about it a little bit, the board tour of Trans Mountain Diversion product or impacts and projects in Grand County. Ideally, we would show you all of the TMDs, but as you know, there are so many of them that it would take a week of touring. So we're going to focus this in Grand County. And we're going to look at both Denver's Moffett project and its impacts in the Fraser. We're going to look at the Colorado Big Thompson project and its impacts on the Colorado and the surrounding area. Ideally, we would like folks to get there on Sunday night. And we have a hotel block reserved. Staff will be reaching out to the board to see what your availability and interest is. The reason Sunday night is that we'd like to get an early start on Monday morning. We will have a bus for that day of tour. And we'll have presentations on the bus, and would just ask, given our last tour where we had a bus, that anybody who thinks they might be sick, we wouldn't mind it if you stayed home. We had an outbreak of COVID the last time we did this, so let's not do that again.
First, we went through states.
I'm laughing at
Yeah,
that.
right.
That's where we got it.
So let's just try to avoid that if we can, but that tour should be really good. The meeting will then be Tuesday and Wednesday in Winter Park at the Headwater Center. If you haven't been there, it's a really amazing facility, and looking forward to that day and a half meeting. That afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, we would invite any board members who have or who just want a refresher on it, haven't been to the Wolford Mountain Reservoir and the Richard Dam. We spent a lot of time talking about that. It would be great to have you see it, meet the operational staff up there, understand what it is we're working on, see some of the implementation. Just really understand it even better than you might just from sitting in a boardroom talking about it. But on that one, we would ask people to transport themselves from Winter Park to just above Kremling. So it's a, 45-minute drive. You get up there and then you can disperse from there. So you're leaving from Kremling to wherever home might be. Recognize that's a full commitment. whatever you can join for that, we'd appreciate it. But as I said, Stephanie will be reaching out. So
So you don't need us on the seventeenth then?
on the 17th, no,
I thought I seen something that had us committed to you for
no,
seventeenth.
no.
Okay.
Fourteenth,
14th.
15th and
And
16th.
actually,
Okay,
technically,
that's fine.
that you would come up the night of the 13th,
Understand.
for anybody who needs, who isn't within quick driving range. And it's, you know, the other thing, we recognize that having board members or board meetings in Glenwood Springs is really, appropriate most of the time because it's equidistant from most areas in the district. For members who are, say, coming from Uray or Hinsdale County, getting up to Grand County is quite a drive, so we apologize. No air service between the two, so there's kind of an option, but, you know.
Fishing season, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Fish my way up there.
I will say, just to entice you a little bit to the tour, we are ending the tour, out on Grand Lake, looking at Grand Lake clarity issues in, the boat. And so, we'll have dinner up there in Grand Lake as well, so, I just want to encourage people, that it's not all hard labor. We want to reward you a little bit. Yeah. So,
Andy, go back, I'm sorry, when do we,
Sunday, the 13th,
Sunday, the
will be the
13th.
evening. The tour will be on the 14th.
Yeah.
The board meeting will be the 14th and half of the 16th.
Okay, gotcha.
And the boat ride and dinner, we're talking about the Sunday or the
Sunday night.
Wednesday?
It's on Monday.
Monday.
Monday is the boat ride.
Okay.
It's the end of the tour that day.
Monday, that's the, is it everything?
Bunch of trout lake too, isn't it?
Well, we tentatively have the budget workshop scheduled September 18th. It's a Thursday. We usually precede the seminar. We'll say that that's a little tentative right now. We may need to move it because the CWCB's 120-day period for their hearing would run out right about then. And we may have a hearing on Shoshone, a contested hearing in front of the CWCB that around that time or possibly that day. So we're gonna work with CWCB staff to figure that out, but we'll let you know as soon as we do. That is a tentative date right now. So apologize for that. It is just a hard thing to keep all the balls in the air sometimes. All right, and with that, I think we have lunch. No, we don't have lunch yet.
Well, it's gonna be a little late. because
We're
the-
ahead of schedule.
we ended early, which who knew was even possible.
Well, all right,
They should be here around 12.
Good
Okay.
meetings start
meeting
on
should be
time.
here in 15 minutes.
Better meetings, close early.
Mr. President.
Well, thank you all for being here and taking your time out of your busy world. I know this is a big commitment, but it's well appreciated by those of us that have been around and by your communities. I'm sure that they are very proud of you for holding a seat on this table and in this board of directors. Things you do are incredibly important. I think.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
We're not prepared to